In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Our book today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on the birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state social...
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, welcome back, or welcome to our greetings, let's start this over again. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. That's what happens when I get startled when the show starts. It's like, what? Are we on the air? Yes, we are. Okay, we got a lot to talk about today. A political party with an armed paramilitary wing is not consistent with democracy. In California, we're going to get into that in the first hour in just a moment. Also in California, speaking of guns, it looks like the gun industry won't be able to hide from accountability. This new law that Governor Newsom signed into law day before yesterday, it takes effect in June, as I recall, of next year, about a year from now. And it's a big deal. I'll give you all the details on that in just a minute. And I've got a crazy alert for you in the first hour. There's a new right-wing explanation for Trump's effort to tamper with a witness on the January 6th thing. Yeah, seriously, really. I'll tell you all about it. In our second hour, the right-wing terror machine is going after an abortion doctor around this 10-year-old girl who got impregnated in Indiana and had to, or in Ohio, and had to flee to Indiana to get an abortion. And also there's a judiciary crisis that Democrats need to be doing something about. We need to have a conversation with Dick Durbin about this, among others, and Chuck Schumer. I'll get into that in the second hour of the program. And in our third hour of the program, a fascinating story. Spencer Schneider is a high-end lawyer in New York City who spent 23 years in a high-end cult in New York City. And we're going to talk about this. How do you get into and out of a cult? Well, let's ask a former cultist. So a lot to talk about today. There's a lot going on. And I want to start out with my op-ed today from HartmannReport.com. It's titled, "A Political Party with an Armed Paramilitary Wing is Not Consistent with Democracy." And, I start out telling the story of this kid that used to terrorize me when I was, me and several of my friends, actually, when I was growing up. This was 1959. I was like 8 years old. And this kid, his name was Dennis, and he lived down the street from us. And he loved beating the crap out of people. I mean, this was his thing. And there were several people, several other kids who eventually started out as his victims and then became part of his gang. He had a little gang of 3 guys, and they would, go around just pounding on anybody. And I later learned that Dennis's dad used to tie him to a pole in the basement and whip him frequently for any transgression, basically. This was Dennis's punishment for pretty much anything he did. And that was when I first began to understand that although I didn't know the words, that the roots of authoritarianism are found in powerlessness and humiliation. You know, when the German soldiers returned home to Germany after their crushing defeat in World War I, they started forming armed paramilitary groups, looking for a leader. Hitler came along and said, "I will be your leader," and thus the brown shirt. Here in the United States, we're seeing, 42 years of Reagan's neoliberalism has ripped apart the American economy and the American working class. We have shipped 60,000 factories overseas. That's tens of millions of good-paying union jobs have been replaced with, do you want fries with that? And this collapse of the American middle class right across the board has left a lot of Americans looking for villains. Who did this to me? And how and why? And the Republican Party, since Richard Nixon, has been more than happy to tell them that the villains in this story are black people, brown people, gay people, Democrats, liberals, you name it. I mean, this is the famous quote from Nixon's chief of staff, John Ehrlichman, about this. To compound this, we've had three massive tranches of tax cuts, the first from Reagan, the second from Bush Jr., and the third from Donald Trump, that have turned America into the most unequal society in the developed world. We have levels of inequality now in the United States that exceed any time in our history, that literally exceed the Gilded Age. And this is a combustible mixture. A functioning civil society requires trust in the government and trust in each other. But who can trust a government that has impoverished them? And who can trust city slickers who are living high on the hog, or at least seem to be, as rural America sinks deeper and deeper into debt? And just consider these numbers. Red states, men in red states, watched resentfully as this educated urban middle class replaced them at the center of the American economy. The Brookings Institution just found that in 2016, the counties that put Donald Trump in the White House generated only 36% of the entire nation's economic output. By 2020, the Trump voting red counties had fallen to just 29% of the economy. These people are powerless, they're humiliated, they're sliding deeper into debt every year, and they are, and obviously many of them are racist, but it goes beyond that. Now you've got Republicans coming along and adding racism to this mixture openly. I mean, Donald Trump, he opened his campaign in 2016, or 2015, his primary. He opened it by pointing to brown people coming across the border as the cause of your problems. And of course, that black guy in the White House, Barack Obama, who's there illegitimately. This was, Trump's sales pitch. He was the birther before there were birthers. I mean, he started this thing. So here you've got all these disempowered white men across America, and what happens? Bushmaster comes along and starts a 2-year advertising campaign around the theme of consider your man card reissued. And now Republicans are using that your gun is your man card thing in their advertising and their marketing. You see, Republicans shooting at things. You see Republicans aiming guns at things. You see, in their television ads. In 2016, Donald Trump invited the Oath Keepers to protect polling places in the election. This was when the Republican Party merged with an armed white supremacist militia. And mixing a political party with an armed paramilitary wing is an absolute flaming disaster for a democracy. We saw this, like I said earlier, in Germany in the 1920s with the brown shirts and Hitler, the late 1920s, early 1930s, and we saw it, the only time, to the best of my knowledge, we saw something like this in the United States was the rise of the Klan in the 1880s through the 1930s. when they were, quite literally the armed paramilitary wing of the largely Southern white racists, who were mostly at that time Democrats, although there was no shortage of Republicans who were right there with them in the Klan. But the result of this has been an absolute explosion of guns. In 2001, only 3 million guns were manufactured and sold in the United States. The first year that President Obama was in office, we elected a black guy as president, and these white racists went nuts. The first year that Obama was in office, it went to 5 million guns a year. By his fifth year in office, they were pouring out of the American factories at nearly 11 million guns a year. And that doesn't count those manufactured overseas and sold in the United States. This is a quote from a website called Visual Capitalist that compiles statistics and puts them into graphs. From 2010 to 2019, an average of 13 million guns were sold legally in the United States every year. 13 million. In 2020 and 2021, annual gun sales sharply increased to 20 million a year. This is what's called a generative process. It creates more of itself. As the number of guns increases, gun violence increases. As gun violence increases, the fear of gun violence increases. As the fear of gun violence increases, more people buy guns to protect themselves from gun violence. And thus you've got more guns. A 2020 study found that 40% of gun purchasers were first-time buyers. That was a 67% increase over previous years. And now you've got Republican politicians talking about Second Amendment remedies. This started with Sharon Engel in 2011, and they're still using that phrase. And when you combine that sense of victimhood with this explosive search for villains responsible for the economic, political, and social stress, and then throw in gratuitous racism being openly promoted by the Republican Party and their candidates, this is what you get. And the Republican Party, instead of looking at this going, we should disavow this armed paramilitary wing. We should say, no, we got nothing to do with Proud Boys and 3%ers and Oath Keepers and whatnot. No. They're not saying that. Instead, John Cornyn came out day before yesterday and said, we are not going to do anything, nothing, zero, zip, nada, to stop the river of guns that are flowing into American society right now, and the 400+ million guns that have already polluted our political landscape, our national landscape. This is now the Republican position. They are embracing armed white supremacist militias. And it goes way beyond just the money that the NRA gives Republican politicians. This I own a gun has become basically the key to Republican identity in America. Or at least, well, I was going to say at least white Republicans, but basically that's pretty much the only kind of Republicans there are anymore. Yes, I know about Tim Scott. He's the exception that proves the rule, in fact, in my opinion. These guys are the 2022 version of the Klan and the brown shirts. And the Republican Party needs to repudiate them. It's not. And so this is just going to get worse and worse. So what do we do about it? Well, Gavin Newsom in California has a solution. I'll tell you about that on the other side of this break. Stick around. It's 18 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. You'll find the rant over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, "A Political Party with an Armed Paramilitary Wing is Not Consistent with Democracy."
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. Stick around. And welcome back. Brian in Sequim, Washington, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. There's so much information that's been discovered by the January 6th investigation. They couldn't get it all out, and allegedly there is a conversation that was overheard between Trump and Stuart Rhodes, who was affectionately known by the president as a stink eye Stu. And at any rate, the basic thing that was said was that the Oath Keepers were concerned that somehow they were being left out of the picture because the president had said to the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. Mm-hmm. And so he wanted to assure the president that they were on board, and he told him he'd keep an eye out for him.
Wow. You know, the question that I've been wondering, and I mentioned this once a few days ago, and I think, frankly, it needs more exposure and speculation, is whether the Oath Keepers were providing security for Roger Stone. They have provided security for Steve Bannon, I believe. They have provided security for other Republican politicians. The Republicans and the Oath Keepers have been really tight since 2016 when Donald Trump invited them into the GOP. I'm wondering if those Oath Keepers who were at the Capitol were there in anticipation of Donald Trump arriving, and they were going to be his Praetorian Guard. They were going to be his protectors who would lead him up to, through the crowd and into the Senate chamber there and up to the podium where he would proclaim that he is now the President of the United States, henceforth and forevermore, world without end, amen. What do you think, Brian?
I think you just painted this chilling picture that I certainly hope never comes to that, but when
Hitler was inducted as Chancellor of Germany, the brown shirts were there.
So where are we at if we use that as an analogy? Like 1931, 32?
Yeah.
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 I think
except that we've interrupted the process. Joe Biden getting elected interrupted the process, and I think it's permanently broken. I think that what we're looking at now is going to be stochastic terrorism, scattershot killings and violence as this movement continues to try to do its little civil war. But I don't think it's ever going to get its mojo back.
Whatever happened to the silver shirts?
Who's that?
Well, during the 30s in America, the pro-fascists, kind of like the members of the Bund, mm-hmm. They literally were wearing these silver shirts in emulation of the stormtroopers in Germany.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know about that. What's with fascists doing fashion statements, I mean, it's like, these militias wearing, tan khakis and polo shirts and, oh, yeah, we're into a fashion statement here. It's like, what?
I'm surprised that Stuart Rhodes doesn't have a swastika on his eye patch.
Yeah, well, apparently he's going to go along and get along. He's trying to stay out of prison, so he's cooperating with the prosecutors. I mean, we'll see. He's facing seditious conspiracy. He's facing 20 years in prison. But Brian, thanks a lot for the call. I got to run here, but thank you. It's 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls and my story. I got to tell you the story about what is happening in California. And this is actually really good news. Stick around. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Back during World War I under President Wilson, we had a windfall profits tax on war profiteers, essentially, of 95% above their normal profits. You were allowed to make your normal profits, but when you started making more than that, 95% tax on that income. President Franklin Roosevelt revisited the exact same thing, windfall profits tax, during World War II, saying he didn't want this war to produce any new war millionaires. During the Korean War, Dwight Eisenhower had a windfall profits tax. During the echo of the fall of the Shah of Iran, when all the Iranian oil was taken off the marketplace and the price spiked, President Ronald Reagan imposed a windfall profits tax on the oil and gas industry to stop exploitation of that. Now we have Senator Bernie Sanders in the Senate and Ed Markey as well along with him, and Representative Jamal Bowman in the House saying, let's do the same thing now. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. So California, this is a big deal. You know, I laid out one of the problems. I mean, you know, this large problem of a militia aligning itself with a political party. This is something that when it happens, this is like Duterte using the various police departments and armed militias, private militias across the Philippines as a private army to go after and kill people who were using drugs. This is like the brown shirts in Germany. They were, you know, people think the brown shirts were like an official part of the army or something. No, no, no. They were like the Proud Boys. This, or at least that's how they started, as a volunteer militia that had nothing to do with the government, and Hitler brought them in. The black shirts, Mussolini's people. Again, another, I mean, what's with these guys' fashion statements? Oh, yeah, we've got to all dress the same. These nonconformists always conforming. But the black shirts for Benito Mussolini, same deal. So what do we do with all these guns? I mean, pouring guns into this kind of a mixture is like pouring gasoline on a fire. Well, Gavin Newsom just signed a bill into law in California that will go into effect in July of next year. It goes into effect 1 year from this month. It was Assembly Bill 1594. It's called the Firearm Industry Responsibility Act. And it requires manufacturers, distributors, and dealers of guns and ammunition to follow these new state standards. Now you say, well, wait a minute, what happened? I mean, you know, there was this law passed in 2005. George W. Bush, when the Republicans controlled Congress and held the White House, George W. Bush pushed through this federal law called the Firearm Industry Responsibility Act, which says that you can't sue gun manufacturers. Well, it turns out there's a loophole in that federal law. And that loophole says that if a gun manufacturer violates state laws, they can be held responsible at the state level. So you can't sue them in federal court, but you can in state court if there's a state law that they're violating. So Gavin Newsom and the Democrats in California just provided that law. This is good stuff. Gavin Newsom, Phil Ting, the guy who co-authored the bill, he said gun violence is now the leading cause of death among kids and teens in the United States, surpassing car accidents. For far too long, the firearms industry has enjoyed federal immunity from civil lawsuits, providing them no incentive to follow our laws. And Gavin Newsom, you know, comes out and says, okay, this is it. He says, nearly every industry is held to account when their products cause harm or injury, all except one, the gun industry. Today, California is going to change that. They can no longer hide from the mass destruction they have caused. Bingo. By the way, Newsom, who, you know, we're speculating about for president, he just endorsed Joe Biden, said, yes, I'll vote for him in a heartbeat. Campaign for him, too.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Which is absolutely the right answer to the question, even if you're thinking of running for president. Good on you, Gavin Newsom. We'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by John Pavlovitz. It's titled, If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, Finding a Faith That Makes Us Better Humans. This is from the introduction titled, You Had One Job. If you want a good laugh, Google the phrase, you had one job. The results are hilariously tragic parade of seemingly impossible fails, unfathomably poor planning, and face-palming, inducing human error. A piece of melted cheese on top of a fast food burger bun. The word stop misspelled on a street crossing. A keep to the right sign with its arrow facing left. A toilet lid inexplicably installed below the seat itself. It's strange stuff. Seeing these stupefying train wrecks and task execution tends to elicit two responses. Usually making you feel a little bit better about yourself while simultaneously wanting to track down the culprits in an effort to understand how they managed to neglect the primary duty assigned to them. We begin to speculate. Were they temporarily distracted? Did they not properly comprehend the instructions? Did they feel as though someone above them in the chain of command dropped the ball? Were they just plain lazy? When people miss the point so spectacularly, we want to know how and why, because that kind of failure feels impossible from the outside. It seems unfathomable to get the main thing wrong, and seeing it happen sparks our curiosity. I imagine Jesus knows well the curiosity that comes with watching people give clear direction lose their way. As a longtime Christian by aspiration, if not always in practice, I often envision an exasperated Jesus coming back and the first words out of his mouth to his followers as his feet hit the pavement being, "You had one job, love. So what happened?" I wonder what massive wave of excuses and rationalizations would come flooding from the mouths of the faithful multitude in front of him, how they might justify their mistreatment of the assailed humanity in their care, the verbal and theological gymnastics they'd attempt to avoid culpability for their own cruelty. Would they stridently recite him a verse from Leviticus? Would they blame the liberal media for morally corrupting America? Would they talk about people's wicked lifestyle choices? Would they argue that they were loving the sinners in their midst, but simply hating their sin? Would they frantically offer up the same platitudes and parrot back the same partisan talking points that they've gotten used to brandishing on social media and proffering in Sunday school classes? And if all else failed to convince him, would they quote Jesus to himself in a desperate Hail Mary effort to pass the buck to him for what they did or failed to do while supposedly standing up for him? And there, fully seen in the piercing gaze of the namesake of their very faith tradition, with all their justifications and excuses exhausted and only their fully exposed hearts left, would any of their responses be sufficient reasons for refusing to love? When that was the singular task and primary commandment that he left them responsible for tending to? In my less compassionate moments, I admit that I like to picture it not going well for them. I know it's far less than admirable, let alone Christ-like. But some days my heart strangely warms at the possibility of a few billion brimstone-breathing evangelists, sanctimonious conservative politicians, and plank-eyed judgmental Christian neighbors all having to explain themselves in a sanctified flop-swept moment they can't exegete or gaslight themselves out of, and they all get what they have coming to them. But my self-righteous revelry doesn't last long. The mirror calls me out as I remember what I think I know about Jesus, and that rescues me from full-blown, unabated hubris. I begin to wonder what my excuses might be, how I'd spin the enmity I manufacture here, what story I'd come up with for not doing the one task we both know compromises a disciple's job description. And if I really believe what I'm supposed to believe, are any of my justifications sufficient? If God is love, and if Jesus is the perfect expression of that love, and if I'm supposedly trying to follow that Jesus, how can I be so love-impaired so frequently? How do I miss the singular point so consistently? It's not as if I didn't know what I was signing up for, like some lengthy online user agreement I blindly accept in haste, missing the bombshell fine print underneath. Having read the Gospels a few million times, give or take a few 100,000, I know the primary commandment is not something I need to excavate from cumbersome layers of foreign language translations and cultural mores of the time. Jesus himself clearly laid out the most important commandment for me and for everyone who's ever cracked open a Bible, and even most people who've never cracked open a Bible. And so we'd all understand what's being asked of us going in, so there would be no post-altar call buyer's remorse or deathbed claims of a sucker punch, bait and switch. Loving God and neighbor and self is the elemental stuff of Christian prayers, songs, T-shirts, and bumper stickers, and we know that. But as the master Morpheus said to protege Neo in the first and only truly great Matrix film, there is a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. Love is the path that Jesus laid out for us. The book, John Pavlovitz's If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, Finding a Faith That Makes Us Better Humans. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Oh, man, holy cow. Just a quick heads up here. There's Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders have worked out a version 2 of Build Back Better, and that they want to roll out in the next few weeks. And now there's this small bunch of right-wing Democrats on the take, basically, in the House of Representatives. Josh Gottheimer is the leader of the gang, but it also includes Carolyn Bordeaux, a Democrat from Georgia, Ed Case, a Democrat from Hawaii, Tom Suozzi, a Democrat from New York, Susie Lee, a Democrat from Nevada, Dean Phillips, a Democrat from Minnesota, and Mikey Sherrill, a Democrat from New Jersey. And, you know, Joe Manchin says, okay, this bill is good enough for me, but these guys are... Well, the story Axios is reporting that Gottheimer, quote, is gauging support among House centrists for a counteroffer to the emerging Senate reconciliation package with one big clause: no new taxes on billionaires. Well, you know who's paying these people, right? I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise. So Pramila Jayapal, who runs the Congressional Progressive Caucus, so this, let's see, is this, yeah, this is not oh yeah, this is a quote from her. Oh no, it's not. This is from a reporter. This article I'm getting this from is kind of poorly written because it doesn't identify the sources. Let me just get to this quote is from an author, okay? The author named Greenberg. Quote, Gottheimer is just being a saboteur, totally captured by his financial sector donors attempting to stop progress by throwing a tantrum. He takes his cues from wealthy Wall Streeters who happen to have one of their multiple mansions in his New Jersey district. That's why it makes sense for him to throw sand in the gears of any bill that might make those mansion owners pay their fair share of taxes. Obviously, Democrats are not immune to being bought off any more than Republicans are. It's just that there are a lot fewer of them. I just named, maybe 7 or 8 Democrats who are on the take in the House. Well, weirdly enough, the House majority is 7 or 8 or thereabouts. I don't recall the exact number, but it's in that neighborhood. So, all the billionaires have to do is buy off a small number of Democrats. They've got 2 in the Senate, Manchin and Sinema, and they've got 6, 7, 8 in the House. We've got a lot of work to do in this regard, and frankly, I think, it's probably most of these primaries are over, and these people are really, really well funded. We got rid of one of them here, Kurt Schrader in Oregon. We had one of these sellout, bought-off Democrats here in Oregon, and we replaced him with a good progressive. This has got to be a project for all of us, and so anyway, step by step. Christian in Richmond, Virginia. Hey, Christian, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing today? Thanks a lot for taking my call.
Sure.
Appreciate it. I guess my question and my comment today is almost irrelevant given the darkness that I just had to listen to the last few minutes about guns. But moving along. I don't know if you saw the report today in Washington Post and elsewhere that Donald Trump is considering a presidential run announcement for September.
Right. He's originally we thought it might happen a week or so ago, but yeah, I saw that article. And, he sees this as his insulation against a lawsuit. He thinks if he's a candidate for president, that Merrick Garland will be less likely to prosecute him.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, I think it's sort of funny that he thinks that.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of reasons for that. But my take was that this might be the best news that Democrats could have probably hoped for in these upcoming elections, and I'll explain why. If he announces a run just when the January 6th commission is putting out their report about what happened and all the bad news that's coming at him, every Republican is going to be forced to answer a question. Do you or do you not support Donald Trump's run for president in 2024? And if the answer is yes, they do, then it's clear that they support a seditionist and a potential dictator for the president of the United States. And that's going to galvanize every Democrat and independent to show up and vote against him, vote against Republicans in the midterm. If they say they don't, then that potentially sets up, a bunch of lunatics who are still following this guy to stay home and not vote at all.
Yep. And also it creates a civil war within the party because you've got Ron DeSantis,
Right.
who's desperately running for president, although first he's got to hold on to his seat as governor of Florida, which we talked about earlier in the week.
Sure.
I think he's right now probably purging Democratic voters even faster than Jeb Bush did back in 2000.
No, that's exactly right. I agree with you about that. Look, I'm not saying that anything's set in stone, and if it's a 70-30 chance he's going to announce, but you want to talk about good news for Democrats and what they could have hoped for. I mean, no one's going to talk about inflation, gas prices, or how old Joe Biden is. It's going to be like, the talk is only going to be about Donald Trump.
I agree. Christian, I think you're absolutely right. Your analysis is spot on. Christian, thanks a lot for the call. Philip in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Philip, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I'm going to tell you why nothing's going to happen to Trump.
Okay.
And you brought up how many guns there are in the United States. I don't think Merrick Garland wants to sacrifice his life and the life of his family to prosecute him. If he did that, he would be getting a state funeral within a week.
I don't think so.
And if you don't think that's true, then you don't know what gun violence is. They got to Reagan. Remember that?
Well, no, they didn't get to Reagan. One crazy guy whose dad was very, very wealthy and very well connected. John Hinckley's dad was having lunch with George H.W. Bush, the vice president, around the time that his son shot at Reagan.
Right. But let's talk about 2022, not 1982. The reality is there are enough already willing and able Trump enthusiasts to put a couple of rounds into Merrick Garland and his entire family if he were to prosecute.
Philip, I'm sorry. I'm just going to end the conversation right here. I disagree. Well, I agree that there's more than enough Trump enthusiasts who are willing to do that or who would fantasize about that or who have fever dreams about that. But A, Garland's got good security, and B, we're not there yet. And thank God. And I don't think that, frankly, we're going to get there. We haven't seen political assassinations in this country in a while. And the ones that we did see were not so much about politics. It was the mafia that took down John and Bobby Kennedy. And it was racism that took down Martin Luther King. You could argue that that was politics, but I think not. I think you're massively overestimating the power and willingness of these people on the right. And frankly, I also think, and maybe, time will prove me wrong, but I believe not, that their numbers, rather than increasing, are decreasing right now. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Well, I think part of what might prove that is look what happened up at Boise, Idaho last month at the gay parade. The cops arrested all those, what were they, Proud Boys or Oath Keepers?
No, it was another group, Patriot Front.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, there's so many of them.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right. And in that regard, I would hope that Garland would do his job and indict Trump ASAP.
I think he will.
It is getting closer to, don't know about visitors and all that, 24/7 guard, lock the windows so he can't jump out of his suite. That's what I'd like to see happen to Trump.
Yeah.
He'd be miserable.
I referenced this, I believe it was 2 days ago, maybe 3 days ago on this program in response to a question, from somebody who said, is Trump going to go to jail? And I said, I don't think so. I don't think that there's any chance that Trump is going to go to jail, although I disagree. My reason is somewhat different than yours, Dennis. And in fact, somebody put up a diary on Daily Kos yesterday, saying essentially the same thing. So I don't think I'm crazy here. And that is that, A, he's got $1 billion and the best lawyers money can buy. He will be able to string this thing out for years, whatever kind of indictment or prosecution there is, number one. And number two, he's 77 years old, or 76. He's in that neighborhood. And he lives on cheeseburgers. I mean, this guy is, mortal, shall we say. And so, and frankly, I think he's, there is this thing that, when men are at the peak of their power, their political power, when there's a lot of approval, their testosterone levels actually go up. And I think that that's been the case for Trump. But then when men lose power, Like, I mean, there have been studies on this showing that literally when a man loses a job, his testosterone levels will drop like by 100 milligrams per deciliter. I don't know how they do it, but will measurably drop. And I think, you know, you will see that with Trump, in my opinion, and that not just the testosterone, but all of the psychological stuff associated with that is very often associated with things like heart attacks and strokes. So,
yeah,
you know,
sure. Here's another thing, too. I mean, he could try to string this out. Bannon apparently tried to string it out, and he's got to go to court next week. So
yeah.
I think that's a matter of the judges. Judges, first thing he's going to do is try to get a dismissal. That's gone, and then he's going to try this, that, and the other thing. You got to have judges just saying no, 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 and get him to trial ASAP.
But if he can string it out for 3 or 4 or 5 years, I don't think he'll outlive that. Although, you know, who knows? I mean, sometimes people surprise you. Dennis, I got to run. Thank you for the call. Interesting topic, isn't it? 45 minutes past the hour. It's 46 now. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You are here on the place where smart people get their news. And welcome back. Ari in Eureka, California. Hey, Ari, thanks for using the Thom Hartmann app. What's up?
Sure thing. Hey, Tom, I'm a costume designer, so I pay attention to these things. You asked several times this morning statements for these militia groups and the brown shirts and the black shirts and the coat polos. I think it has to do with the fact that we don't have any manhood rights in our society anymore. And you're not a man until your father or some other man tells you you're a man. And so by putting the shirt on, you're a man.
Oh, that's
interesting. We like to label ourselves. We like to label ourselves so that people know who we are. It's why people wear shirts with their favorite band. It says who they are.
Yeah, it's a statement of identity. So
exactly.
That would argue more, you know, I totally get your lack of rituals of manhood or adulthood. I mean, you know, we have vestigial ones from ancient times, you know, the confirmation in the Catholic Church, the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah in Judaism. Those have been largely replaced by basically high school graduation as a ritual of adulthood. There used to be, you know, going into the military. That was certainly like during World War II. That was for my father. I know that was the turning point in his life. That was when he thought that he'd become a man. You know, at 17, he joined the Army. But it seems like maybe what you're describing is more closely associated with a sense of tribal identity. Not so much I'm now a man, yeah. but rather I've found my community and now I'm part of it. This is more of, you know, in the third hour we're going to have this expert on, or this guy who got out of a cult on, and I think it's kind of that. Does that make sense, Art?
It's both.
Yeah.
I think it's both, and that's why we have the proud boys, not the proud girls.
Why would women be less inclined to have tribe than men?
I think women automatically create tribe just in how we socialize.
Oh, well, also oppressed minorities, and women are one in the United States, certainly, tend to bind to each other just by virtue of the fact of their identity. Whereas in oppressor majorities, you have, you know, it's more atomized. There's more fractioning of social groups.
Yeah, that's true. But I think women bond more easily than men just in general.
Yeah, that's my point. I'm agreeing with you. And I think the thing that drives that bonding among women is the sense, you know, there was just a kind of a throwaway comment I read, I think it was over at Daily Kos a week or two ago, and it's just haunted me. I've been thinking about writing an op-ed about it. Somebody did a study, and they asked men and women, what are you afraid of? And the number one thing that men were afraid of was humiliation. The number one thing that women were afraid of was being murdered or raped, violence. And I mean, that's amazing.
If you ask a man, what do you do when you walk out your door to stay safe? Most men will look at you and go, well, what do you mean?
Exactly.
But most women will say, I put my keys in my fist.
Right.
I look around.
Right. Right. And so, therefore, you can see that women would, automatically feel a bond with other women because, hey, we're all in this together. Whereas men, not so much. Yeah, I get it. All right, thank you. I'm still crystallizing this. I'm trying to figure out a take or an angle or a hook into it to write an op-ed about it because I think it's a huge sociological thing, All right, thank you.
I look forward to reading that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you've identified something important here. Appreciate the call. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Back in 2018, Pastor Dave Barnhart of the St. Juania United Methodist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, delivered a sermon that is worth revisiting. He said, "The unborn are a convenient group of people to advocate for. They never make demands of you. They are morally uncomplicated, unlike the incarcerated, addicted, or the chronically poor. They don't resent your condescension or complain that you're not politically correct. Unlike widows, they don't ask you to question patriarchy. Unlike orphans, they don't need money, education, or childcare. Unlike aliens, they don't bring all that racial, cultural, and religious baggage that you dislike. They allow you to feel good about yourself without any work at creating or maintaining relationships. And when they're born, you can forget about them, because they cease to be unborn. It's almost as if, by being born, they have died to you. You can love the unborn and advocate for them without substantially challenging your own wealth or power." The whole clip is over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Kim in Nashua, New Hampshire. I used to live in Nashua. Hey, Kim, what's up?
You did? Oh,
I did.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call, Tom. I love your show.
Thank you.
And last night I watched a really interesting documentary. I kind of wondered if you had seen it too. It's called Wives of the Oligarchs.
No.
It's on Paramount Plus, and it interviews like 3 or 4 of the wives of Russian oligarchs, and it goes all the way up till today, to the Ukrainian war, or the war. And it talks about, it makes a really compelling case about how Putin is like a mafia kingpin, and it shows his rise to power. And I just thought it was an important film to watch, and thought other people might be interested in watching it, because to me it really just kind of shined the light on the fact that the Republican rhetoric really works to try to divide us up, exploiting fears about race, gender, religion, to really divert our attention from what to me seems to be happening. I just kind of worry that we're going to have a repeat here in the U.S. of this rise of oligarchy, like what happened in Russia. Maybe it'll happen a little different. But I was kind of relieved to hear what you said earlier, that, you didn't think we were at this point of, like, people assassinating leaders and things.
Well, I haven't seen any evidence of it. I mean, there's all kinds of threats and lots of noise being made, but I don't think we're there. But we are in full-blown oligarchy in the United States. I mean, Jimmy Carter said that on this program 7 years ago. America's no longer a democracy; it's an oligarchy. And he was right.
Yeah.
We do have democratic aspects of our society, and we need to amplify those and strengthen those. And we need to bring back, reasonable tax rates so that we can get our oligarchy under control. But spot on. So it was called Wives of the Oligarchs on
Wives
Paramount
of the
Plus.
Oligarchs. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
I'll have to check it out. Kim, thank you. Thanks for the information on that.
Thank you.
Good talking to you.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
Yep, you
Bye.
too. Kathleen in Tallahassee, Florida. Hey, Kathleen, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I was really like to get some insight as to why you think a 3-star general, Mike Flynn, would join with Trump.
I think he's mentally ill.
I'm from a military family, and I just cannot imagine that happening.
Yeah, I think he's mentally ill. I genuinely do. And Obama fired him, and because he was acting like a paranoid. I think he is clinically paranoid. He's a conspiracy theorist. I think it's really a fairly simple explanation. And I think that a lot of the kind of people that he had surrounded himself with, and frankly, a lot of people in these various militia movements who are like preparing for the end of the world, and these preppers, and stashing food and digging holes in the ground in the woods and stuff like that. I think that there's a fair amount of mental illness, and that is associated with this, and these people draw each other to themselves. Make sense?
I hope that Trump can claim mental illness at the end of this all.
Yeah, well, Trump is clearly mentally ill, but he's also clearly a criminal, and mental illness is sometimes a defense against criminality. But I don't think that either Trump's or Flynn's mental illness should be considered a defense against criminality, because there's a lot of paranoid people out there, who are suffering from paranoia, who actually are concerned that people who don't commit crimes. They know how to live in society. They may have an unpleasant life, they're tortured by their mental illness, but they're not criminals. And so I don't give them a pass. Kathleen, thank you. Greg in Stellacom, Washington. Hey, Greg, we got about a minute to the break. What's up?
Hey, Tom, I'm an old Army guy, and I'm a really lousy chess player, but I watch the world events in the form of chess. I don't think they're going to prosecute Trump immediately, but I think you're going to see the House of Cards and the House of Trump slowly fall, and people will start getting used to seeing the worker bees, the pawns getting taken away. So right now I'm looking at it from a chess standpoint. I want to get your thoughts on this.
I think a good analogy might be the Marcos family, but go ahead, Greg.
Well, I think there are three people that were testifying. There were those that were honest. There were those that didn't testify and took the fifth, and there were those who thought they could fool the Justice Department and the court. And I think one of those was Ivanka Trump.
Yes.
And I think she has possibly perjured herself, and they're going to cut a plea deal with her because she doesn't want to see her kids raised behind a 4-inch thick piece of prison glass. So she's the queen, and she's going to tell on the king. Checkmate.
Well, let's hope so, Greg. Let's hope so. Certainly, there's plenty of evidence that back in the day, she and Eric and Don Jr. were involved in criminal grifting. Rolling Stone did a huge story on this like 4 or 5 years ago with an apartment building in New York City where they were just lying to people to get them to buy in. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Brainwashing of My Dad, How the Rise of the Right-Wing Media Changed a Father and Divided Our Nation and How We Can Fight Back by Jen Senko. This is from Chapter 6, How Talk Radio Hijacked My Dad. In 1984, Reagan was reelected in a landslide victory against liberal Democrat Walter Mondale. That year was also when everything began to change for my dad and our family. In 1984, Dad retired from his job with the federal government at age 62. Both my parents missed being near the shore, so they moved back to New Jersey and settled in Toms River, a town where there was a large retired population. Still energetic, my father got a part-time engineering job 3 or 4 days a week, necessitating a long solo commute by car. He didn't want to waste time on music while driving. He wanted to be stimulated mentally, and he discovered talk radio to keep himself company. At the time, Bob Grant was the dominant talk radio personality. Often called the conservative radio, Grant was an openly racist, sexist, far-right shock jock. On his WABC radio show, he referred to blacks and Hispanics as savages. He believed them to be inferior, and he once even called Martin Luther King Jr. a slimeball. With his combative and testy style, he was considered a pioneer of the talk radio format. Soon, Grant became my dad's commuting buddy. I didn't know Bob Grant from Joe Namath, but I did know I didn't care for his style of yelling at callers or hanging up on them if they disagreed with him. My mother was not a fan of Grant's either, and she delighted in telling me the story of how she ran into him one day. She was at the Ocean County Mall eatery, sitting at a table having lunch when she saw Grant walk in. She recognized him, and when he passed her table, she asked, "You're Bob Grant, aren't you?" He said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Oh, my husband likes you, but I don't." He had been walking away and turned to look back at my mother and gave a little laugh. She said she just sat there at the table and did not smile back. Gradually, it seemed my dad started becoming more agitated after listening to Bob Grant. Eventually, he became consistently more irritable, excitable, and easy to anger. Little did we know, a metamorphosis was beginning. Along with massive deregulation in the communications industry, there were several other factors that led to talk radio's explosion of popularity in the 1980s. The first was that music had moved from the AM dial to the high-fidelity sound of FM, and thus left a void on the AM dial. Broadcasters realized that filling that blank airspace with mainstream news wouldn't make much money. However, entertainment made money, and talk radio was entertainment at its finest, even when it masqueraded as news coverage. Human conversation didn't benefit from high-fidelity sound the way music did, so talk radio filled the void on the AM radio waves perfectly. The second contributor to talk radio's rise was the new accessibility of satellite technology, allowing anyone to broadcast a show nationally. And the third was the fact that when 1-800 numbers became available, you could have callers call in from all over the country. These factors combined to make a pretty powerful storm. The format of talk radio was, of course, not new. The format first debuted in the 1920s, continuing with Father Charles Coughlin's controversial and anti-Semitic radio broadcasts in the 1930s. Coughlin has often been referred to as the father of hate radio, and he paved the way for all that has come in his medium. Many of the most famous conservative talk radio personalities modeled themselves after the 1950s sensation Joe Pyne. His show, It's Your Nickel, consisted of Pyne debating his opinions with people calling in. Calls often culminated with him insulting the caller, to the delight of his audience. The format of talk radio evolved from there, but many of the most popular shows and hosts, including Bob Grant, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and Glenn Beck, have stuck with the confrontational tone and high-emotion interactions that these early hosts introduced. There haven't been many successful liberal talk radio hosts. Ed Schultz, Randy Rhoads, and Alan Colmes tried to make inroads, but simply failed to draw a large audience, in quotes. You may wonder why conservative talk radio programs have been so phenomenally popular while equivalent liberal shows have foundered. Aside from big money to support it, the secret seems to lie in the inflammatory approach favored by these so-called conservative hosts. Abram Brown of Forbes says of liberal talk radio shows, it's not the same thing as a Limbaugh or a Hannity. It's more general, not really railing against the system. No one's yelling, we need to get rid of the Republicans. They're the worst thing that happened in this country. But you'll hear conservative radio hosts say that about liberals on their programs. Brown makes another good point that speaks to that. Tell your audience that the mainstream media is corrupt and biased, that there's more than that there's then there's all the more reason to turn to your conservative talk radio to get the truth. Anger is a hot commodity. Finding an enemy is even hotter. Or as Ailes might say, it's the emotions, stupid. He did not actually say that. A little known but very chilling example of how powerfully influential radio can be is the 1994 Rwandan genocide, where an estimated 800,000 citizens were brutally murdered by their fellow citizens, the Hutus. This happened after an intense radio campaign that started in 1993 dehumanized and demonized one group, the Tutsis. Militia groups were formed, and police and soldiers joined them in the killing. Samantha Power, who later served as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, said killers often carried a machete in one hand and a transistor radio in the other hand. Dad discovers Rush Limbaugh. About a year or so after working part-time in his long commute, my dad officially retired. The book, The Brainwashing of My Dad, by Jen Senko.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. Back on July 1st, which is about 2 weeks ago, a reporter for the Indiana Star, Sherry Rudavsky, who has been on the health and medical beat at the Indianapolis Star for 18 years. This is a highly respected reporter. Citing as her source Dr. Caitlin Barnard, who was the doctor who performed the abortion. This reporter reported that a 10-year-old had to flee Ohio, like, criminals fleeing a state kind of thing. This 10-year-old girl had to flee Ohio to go to Indiana to get an abortion. And Joe Biden mentioned this from the White House, from the podium, pointing out how crazy these anti-abortion laws are and these absolutists, the anti-abortion absolutists. And immediately, and by the way, this was because Governor Mike DeWine, the Republican governor of Ohio, had issued an executive order decreeing that if 10-year-olds got pregnant in Ohio, they had to carry that baby to term. And so, the newspaper, the Indianapolis Star, writes this story, and immediately the right wing comes out and attacks it. The Wall Street Journal, owned by Rupert Murdoch, as is Fox so-called news, publishes a piece in which they called the Rudavsky's report a fanciful tale that was too good to confirm. Right. On Fox News, Emily Compagno. By the way, Judd Legum is writing about this at popular.info this morning. On Fox News, Emily Compagno says that she finds it offensive that the supporters of abortion rights have invented a fake rape victim. Yeah, invented it. Tucker Carlson goes on TV and tells his 3 million viewers, this is simply not true. There are no 10-year-old pregnant girls fleeing Ohio. The Attorney General of Ohio, Dave Yost, goes on a Fox show with Jesse Waters and says, we have regular contact with prosecutors and local police and sheriffs. Not a whisper anywhere of a 10-year-old girl who's pregnant. Not a damn, and then he talks to USA Today and he says, not a damn scintilla of evidence. This is the Attorney General, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the state of Ohio. Well, I don't know of anything about this. And then he goes on to say to USA Today, this is likely a fabrication. So this story just explodes across the American media. It appears that this explosion, by the way, began the smear campaign against the doctor, Bernard, and the reporter, Rudavsky, both women, by the way. That this smear campaign began with a viral tweet by Megan Fox, who works for PJ Media, which is one of these right-wing fringe media sites. And then it got mainstreamed by the Washington Post, for God's sake, in Glenn Kessler's fact-checking column, In fact, it was such a ripoff that Fox News accused Glenn Kessler, excuse me, not Fox News, Megan Fox, the person who did the Twitter thread that, said, oh, there's no girl here. She accused the Washington Post's Glenn Kessler of stealing her work. And Kessler says, oh, yeah, well, this is just an anecdote. And there's only one source, the doctor who performed the abortion. So then, it goes from there. I mean, it's like traveling through the right-wingosphere, but now it's in the Washington Post. And then, day before yesterday, it comes out that Gershon Fuentes, a 27-year-old man who lives in Columbus, Ohio, was, sure enough, arrested and charged with impregnating a 10-year-old, and in fact, he admitted that he had raped her at least twice. So, by the way, Jim Jordan had tweeted, oh, it's all a lie, or words to that effect. So Jim deletes his tweet and doesn't say another word, and Kessler is trying to bob and weave. And the rest of the right-wing media, what's the old saying from Mark Twain, I think it was, it said, a lie will get halfway around the world before the truth gets its boots on. The damage was done. Tucker's viewers and all these, everybody watching Fox, they're all, it's just a lie, made-up lie. And then yesterday it comes out that this guy Fuentes, who got arrested, is not in this country legally. He's a Guatemalan immigrant or refugee or whatever. Actually, he's a Guatemalan criminal who was in the United States. So now the right wing has got their mojo back. Oh yeah, look at that. It's an illegal immigrant who's raping 10-year-olds. Well, it was. And this is their, now they're happy again. It's just pathetic. It's just pathetic. But then to compound this, to make this even worse, the state that that this little girl and her family had to flee to, Indiana, to get the abortion, their attorney general in Indiana, Todd Rokita, keep in mind the Republican attorney general of Ohio said, oh, it's just a made-up story. The Republican attorney general of Indiana, he went on Fox News last night and said, we're going to investigate the doctor who performed the abortion. How dare she give an abortion to a 10-year-old? I mean, he didn't say those exact words, but I think this Dr. Caitlin Bernard is her name. I think she is a hero. She probably saved this little girl's life. I mean, your body is, a girl's body at 10 years old is not developed well enough to carry a pregnancy to term. And frankly, before we started putting hormone-bending, estrogen-mimicking chemicals in our food supply, we didn't see girls 10 years old starting to become, starting to menstruate so that they could possibly become pregnant. But, her body could not handle that. So, Tony Aki over at Daily Kos writes, what the hell is wrong with a person who thinks it's a good thing to force a little girl to have a baby by a pedophile? And then goes on to ask, is this rapist going to be granted visitation rights or even custody like the rapist down in Louisiana? We reported that on this program, and then Louisiana said, the judge said, well, I guess we'll take back the parental rights. I mean, he had literally assigned parental rights to the rapist in Louisiana of an underage girl. And then he backed away after everybody in the country learned about it, and there was all this outrage, and it was like, oh, well, sorry. It is Louisiana, after all. I don't think this is looking good for the Republicans. And I frankly think that, I'm watching them twist themselves in pretzels around these kinds of issues. Abortion should be a decision that a woman makes on her own. And if she wants some help with that decision, she's got a doctor, she's got a family. If she's religious, she's got somebody in her religious organization. But this decision is hers. Or obviously for a 10-year-old, hers and her family's. Or hers in the States. This was a crime. But the forced birth Republicans, they are like feeling their mojo right now. They're passing laws in state after state, no exceptions for rape or incest, no exceptions for children. Now they want to outlaw IUDs. You got pharmacists refusing to sell condoms. They're preparing legislation to outlaw birth control. Clarence Thomas wants to revisit the Griswold decision that legalized birth control for married couples in 1965. I don't think this is going to end well for the GOP. I mean, we'll see what happens come November. But I have a feeling that there's a blowout coming, that there is change in the wind, that Americans, for years and years and years, we've been hearing Republicans talk about this kind of crap and thinking, oh, yeah, they're just being crackpots. They're just blowing smoke out their hats. And now they've done it. This, guns, a half a dozen issues, right?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I don't think this is going to help them at all this fall. And I think Democrats need to make these issues the center of their campaigns. And welcome back. Jane in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Jane, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
You spoke earlier about the uniform of the militia guys, the casual clothing, the khaki pants and the white shirts and the blue sweaters or whatever.
Yeah.
Those are the clothes Donald Trump wears when he goes to golf. Those are Donald Trump's golfing outfits.
That's interesting.
Look at the Charlottesville. They were in white shirts and khaki pants. That's what Donald wears to golf. Sometimes he wears a blue sweater across his shoulder. Some of the guys show up in blue sweaters. The ones who showed up at MLTO's graveside not too long ago, they were wearing the same thing. So they are all mimicking Donald Trump's golfing outfit.
It makes a lot of sense. Wow. So which raises the question, Jane, if Trump goes down in flames politically, and I think he's on the verge of it. In fact, I think it's actually happening in slow motion. Are these guys going to want to continue to model his fashion statement?
Certainly. He's their hero.
Yeah.
No matter what happens to him.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
This is where I said to a caller a little bit ago, and I think it deserves a little more exploration, that I think that there are maybe parallels to the Marcos family. I was in the Philippines when Ferdy Marcos got overthrown and was run out of town. In fact, I got bumped off flights from Manila to Honolulu 5 days in a row on Philippine Airlines because of all of Marcos's cronies were taking over the planes, basically. And so I was stuck there as Aquino was coming to power, and I'm forgetting the name of the member of the Senate who got murdered in a public toilet, and he was, his body was carried right down the street of where my hotel was. And we all thought, okay, that's the end of the Marcos reign, right? Ferdy's going to go to Hawaii with his wife, Imelda, and they're going to, live out their lives. But now Ferdy's daughter is, or maybe granddaughter, I think it's his daughter, is the vice president of the Philippines. And I'm wondering if, if the Trump family dynasty is going to survive this kind of thing, which is kind of a digression from this conversation.
I don't think it's a matter of good or negative or positive. The fact is that they are getting the attention. Donald right now is being immortalized.
Yeah. Good point. Okay. Oh, Jane, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the call. This is a fascinating thing, how democracies cease to be democracies as a consequence of a strongman essentially taking over the country. You know, Ferdy Marcos, the Philippines was a relatively high-functioning democracy for a while after World War II. I mean, you know, we claimed the Philippines in World War II from the Japanese, and Marcos gradually, over about a 20-year period, turned it into an oligarchy, into strongman rule. He, you know, just corrupted the whole thing, very much like Orban is doing in Hungary right now, and like Trump tried to do here in the United States. And I'm wondering out loud here if this is going to be the trajectory that the GOP is going to try to go down. I mean, Ferdy Marcos's party followed him, right? Or will the Republican Party wake up and shake off the Trumps? Stay tuned. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. You know, the Republicans are saying that the solution to mass shootings is to harden our schools. But the schools aren't the only places where mass shootings are happening. I mean, we've had mass shootings in grocery stores, churches, elementary schools, hospitals, doctors' offices, bars, dance clubs, restaurants, roads, highways, town parks, national parks, gas stations, buses, in post offices, in department stores, in malls, in places of business, in people's homes or near them, in apartment buildings, in airports we had a mass shooting, baseball fields, football fields. I mean, you add all this stuff up, and do you really think that the Republicans' logic that we just need to harden every place where there might be a mass shooting by having one door in and out, turn it into a fire trap, and arm everybody around? This makes no sense at all. None whatsoever. I got a video about this with a complete list over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Two quick stories here I want to share with you. The first is that you'll recall how Mitch McConnell jammed through judges in the last year of the Trump administration. I think they got more than 300 federal judges on the bench. My memory may have exaggerated the number, but I think not. In fact, 320 something sticks in my head. And I'm usually pretty good with numbers. But the Democrats seem to be dropping the ball. There's this process called the blue slip. And basically it's that, without going into all the details of the blue piece of paper that travels around the Senate, this is a tradition, by the way. This is not a law. It's not a Senate rule. It's a tradition that if a judge is nominated from, say, Indiana, if either of the two senators from Indiana don't return the blue slip, don't say, yes, that's fine with me, then that judge doesn't get the nomination. It just doesn't go forward. Mitch McConnell ignored that for 4 years during the Donald Trump presidency. Completely ignored it. You had senators who were yelling and screaming about, this guy's a crackpot. He's from my state. I know how bad he is. He shouldn't be in the Senate. And Mitch McConnell put these judges on the bench anyway. Hundreds of them. Right-wing, unqualified, young judges. So now, and keep in mind, more than half our states, have Republican senators. So now, Dick Durbin, who's the head of the Judiciary Committee and represents Illinois in the United States Senate, Dick Durbin and Chuck Schumer, who runs the Senate, are back to respecting the old blue slip rules. So the Republican senators are holding up good nominees because the Democrats are trying to play by the old rules. I'm sorry, the old Republican Party no longer exists. This is a fascist cult. And somebody needs to give Dick Durbin a call and Chuck Schumer a call and say, stop with the blue slips already. You've got 60 some odd, there's 119 vacancies right now. Demand Justice, MoveOn.org, and NARAL Pro-Choice America just wrote a letter to Durbin and Schumer and President Biden saying, this is a quote from their letter, at the current pace, dozens of these vacancies will remain unfilled at the end of the year, and we urge you to do whatever it takes to fill all of them. There are 119 vacancies right now, and there's about 80 of them that will not be filled if Democrats continue to respect Republicans' objections, from their own states. This is just wrong. In fact, it even gets worse. I mean, it looks like Biden and Schumer have cut a deal with Mitch McConnell to get those blue slips. And the deal is that they're going to put Chad Meredith, who's such an extremist anti-abortion Kentucky wackadoodle, on the federal bench for the rest of his life. He's such an extremist, he was too much for Donald Trump. He got rejected by Trump. And Durbin and McConnell are now, and Biden are like, oh yeah, we'll cut a deal with this guy. Don't cut any more deals with Mitch McConnell. Don't cut this deal with Mitch McConnell. In California alone, there are 9 district court vacancies without nominees. By the way, this doesn't have to do with blue slips. There's no Republican senators from California. This has to do with the 2 senators from California not doing their jobs. Durbin needs to get this thing going. And if he happens to represent you, you may want to give him a shout at 202-225-3121 and let him know your thoughts on the matter. The Democrats have to realize, as Joan McCarter writes over at Daily Kos today, and there's a great diary about this at dailykos.com, that Republicans are playing asymmetrical warfare. This is not the good old days. And Dick Durbin and Chuck Schumer need to get their crap together here on this thing. And Schumer needs to call off the summer vacation and get these nominees through, because there is a chance we are going to lose control of the Senate in November. And that's 110 federal judges. Get with the program, guys. We'll be back. I've got a crazy alert for you, and then I'll pick up your phone calls on the other side of the break. It's 27 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the sane among us. Yes, we are still here. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Black Panthers, Portraits from an Unfinished Revolution, edited by Briasha and Yohuro Williams. This is from Chapter 1, In Defense of Self-Defense, Pathways to the Black Panther Party. People joined the Black Panther Party for many different reasons. The moment of politicization was different for everyone, but a few were commonly shared, including the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, and the 1965 Watts Urban Rebellion. A more general sense of frustration and alienation compelled others to join the Panthers' ranks. The party exerted an enormous pull on the imagination of the members, especially those who had experienced police brutality. In the rebellious spirit of the times, the party's bold stance on self-defense resonated with those seeking fresh alternatives for achieving social justice and black liberation. Party members expressed a deep appreciation for other aspects of the Panthers program, including its community service programs, which grew out of a genuine love for the people. My neighborhood friend, a sister that I've known since I was about 11 years old, said, "Claudia, I want you to go with me. We're going to go and hear these Panthers speak at PS 92, which was an elementary school in our community." I said, "Okay, I'll go, I'm down." I listened to these brothers speak and I heard the pitch. I saw the determination and I saw the compassion. I thought, wow, this is the feeling that I used to get when I went into clubs and popped my fingers and got on the dance floor. It was the same feeling, except it was bigger for me now.
It was bigger than me. It was full of love of the people. No longer did we have to argue and fight about, what are you looking at me like that for? Or don't step on my sneaker, or this is my block. Now we really had something to fight for. We had a people to fight for. This is bigger than any gang or club. We had a goal. We had something to look forward to, which was the betterment of black people. It was most definitely something that I was searching for, but I didn't yet know what that I was searching. I didn't find it. It fell on me. That was the first meeting. That's what actually started the wheels in my mind for me to become political. I was rank and file. I did a lot of things. The easiest way to say it is just to imagine worker bees. You got one queen, everyone else works. Rank and file. Those were the worker bees. We did it all. The one thing I enjoyed the most was teaching the political education classes on 7th Avenue in front of the Harlem office. That was the most fruitful. But anything I did, it was for the love of the people. Wherever I was sent, or whatever I had to do, it didn't matter anymore because it was for the love of the people. We were trying to get the word out. If I had to sell 125 papers in a day and I got close to that goal, then I did a good job. I was originally from Queens and came out of the Corona branch of the Black Panther Party. When the Panther 21 were arrested and went to jail, in order to keep those offices open and functioning, Panthers were sent all over the city to Harlem. I was one of the Panthers that ended up in the Harlem branch. That's how I got to be there on Wednesday nights to give the PE classes, the political education classes. I was extremely nervous the first time, but once I found my voice, then it went like clockwork. A lot of the people in the community who were just walking by were like, well, let me stop and see what this little girl is talking about, because I was indeed a little girl at that time. We started off every PE class with a 10-point program, and we ended every PE class with, okay, let me hear from you guys. What do you want to see different in your community, and how are you living? Then we would get the feedback, and then we would know how to concentrate our efforts. Rent strikes were crazy, because if you had to live like that, why should you pay rent? We did clothing drives. We did food drives. We did, of course, the breakfast program. There were a lot of other things that happened, and they might have been more meaningful, but those PE classes stayed with me. We were outside on the street in front of the office. When you were giving a class or you were having a talk inside the office and there were only Panthers around you, the feeling was just different than outside on the street. The Panthers knew what you were doing because they were Panthers and they were doing the same thing. Outside, there were constant questions and answers with the people. You had to give yourself up when you were outside in that crowd. You never knew who was going to say, we don't care about that, we don't care about you, you need to go away. There were a lot of people that just did not know where we were coming from and were afraid that if they were seen in the office or if they were seen asking questions, that they'd get reprisals, that they'd end up getting hurt. They were afraid. Things went so fast. Time seems to accelerate when you're always looking over your shoulder. At this time, it was all-out war against the Panthers, and brothers are being shot down in the street or set up or going to jail for years. We have brothers in jail since that time, 40, 41 years. We've had brothers that we've lost on the inside that we can't let the world forget. The government said, okay, we're going to lock them up and throw away the key and no one will ever care. But it's not true. We want them out. We want freedom for all political prisoners. We don't want any more of them to die on the inside. That's the biggest injustice. There were times when our cadre consisted of almost nothing but women, and that was when the brothers were locked up or had to go underground. I remember being on a front line against a policeman on horseback and being 6 months pregnant. What we wanted was a simple street light, and we got the community out there and we blocked traffic. I didn't know whether I was going to be trampled, my baby killed, but I knew I had to be there. I was an active member of the party from 1968 to 1971, and in those few years, I aged 10, 15 years. We didn't have much time to be little girls. We went straight to womanhood. Talking about these things is bringing up all of these feelings, though I hadn't thought about or touched on them for a long time. It seems that as you get older and you look back on the things that you've done in your life, you say, oh my God, I could have gotten killed then. When you're young, fear is not really in your vocabulary, and once you look back, you wonder, why wasn't I afraid? We didn't have much time to be afraid. It was all about survival. The Black Panthers. Recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Jessica Valenti publishes a newsletter called All in Her Head over at substack.com, and just has an amazing compilation of bizarre Republican statements about rape and abortion. Michigan Governor Garrett Soldano earlier this year said that there should be no exceptions for rape in the abortion laws because the next fetus might be the next president. Missouri State Representative Barry Hovis said that most sexual assaults are actually consensual rapes. Texas Republican Representative Michael Burgess says that we should ban abortion because if you watch a sonogram, they have movements that are purposeful. If they're a male baby, they have their hand between their legs. They feel pleasure. That's right. Women should be legally banned from getting an abortion so that their male fetuses can masturbate, writes Jessica Valenti. It's absolutely bizarre. Idaho Republican Vito Barberi says you can do a gynecological exam by swallowing a camera. What planet do these people live on? A whole list of them is on a video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Hey, crazy alert. This is genuinely crazy. Donald Trump was called out by Liz Cheney at the January 6th hearings, day before yesterday, for reaching out to a witness who was an employee of the White House, sort of like Cassidy Hutchinson, who was a staffer who worked for, actually she was the #1 staffer for Mark Meadows. This was another person who was close to her who could have corroborated her story, who worked in the White House, at least according to reporting from the CNN. And Trump tried to call her, and she didn't take the call. Instead, she called her lawyer, who called the committee, who then said witness tampering, et cetera. So who comes to the rescue? Well, remember Raymond Kelly? He was the police department commissioner in New York City who came up with the bright idea of stop and frisk, that racist policy of, hey, there's a black person, let's grab them. Well, he has a son. His name is Greg Kelly. And Greg Kelly has got a show on Newsmax, which is, Fox News for people who Fox News is too confusing and intellectual for. And so Greg Kelly goes on his show and he says that I've received a call from Donald Trump on more than one occasion. And you can't actually tell it's from him because he's got some system you don't know. Which doesn't seem to have to do with anything, except that Greg Kelly goes on to say it was probably a butt call. Right, like Donald Trump has his phone out and just somehow has the phone number of a White House staffer that he has never talked to before, or doesn't normally talk to. And her number or his number is right up at the top on his phone, and then he happens to sit on his phone and butt calls them? Really? I mean, this is what we've come to? Right-wingers? This is how desperate you are to make it look like Donald Trump isn't a criminal? Why don't you just own it? He's a criminal. I mean, some right-wingers are proud of him for being yeah, he rapes women, yeah, cool. I mean, seriously. It's incredible. Anyhow, Susan in Spokane, Washington. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, it's actually follows up nicely to what you were saying about Chuck Schumer and the Senate and making the deal about judges. My feeling is that the only reason to have kept the Senate under Democratic control is the appointment of judges, which clearly they are falling down on the job and not doing. They don't seem to understand how important it is. And so I think, and you have said many times that you don't want to push too hard on Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema because you don't want them to change parties, which they're probably going to do the next election cycle anyways, and give control of the Senate back to Mitch McConnell. But I think that's exactly what should happen. I think right now, the Manchin and Sinema, mostly Manchin, are holding the Senate hostage, and I think it's time to shoot the hostage.
Well, hang on just a second here, Susan. Number one, they're not the malefactors in this story of the judges. The judges are the responsibility of Chuck Schumer and Dick Durbin. And so, you know, that's where, and I'm not angry with them. I'm just saying, you know, we need to let them know that we care about this as their base, right, as their constituents as well. And number two, I'm all in favor of putting as much pressure as necessary on Manchin and Sinema. In fact, I think Manchin's feeling it. He's up with, you know, he's working with Bernie Sanders for Build Back Better version 2. It's Josh Gottheimer and his sellout Democrats in the House, the so-called, you know, corporate problem solvers caucus, that are threatening to blow the thing up because it'll include tax increases on billionaires.
Well, right, and I understand that Manchin has nothing to do with the judges. And actually, what you were saying about that, what did you call it, the Indiana rule, and which is not even a rule, it's a tradition.
The blue slips, yeah.
This is that Mitch McConnell ignored. This is another thing I've been thinking about Chuck Schumer for a long time, is he should be ignoring all this stuff. Honestly, I think he should be ignoring the filibuster and calling votes.
I agree.
Now, the Republicans aren't going to show up, and there's not going to be a quorum or anything, but you know, you get on the record, hey, all the Democrats voted for this, and the Republicans took the day off. And I think he should absolutely be running the Senate, but he isn't. Mitch McConnell is running the Senate, but the press doesn't cover it that way. The press covers it like, oh, Democrats lack cohesion, they can't get anything done. You throw the control back to Mitch McConnell for the next 3-4 months before the election cycle, and then the press switches its coverage to Republicans say no, Republicans block this. You know, Republicans have no party or no policies because here they have control of the Senate and they've got no policy except for Rick Scott's and Social Security. I think that the focus has got to be put on the Republicans in the Senate are killing everything. And as long as Chuck Schumer
have been for decades, by the way.
Yes, and Chuck Schumer is absolutely feckless. McConnell is running that show. Give it to him. Because we're not getting the court appointments anyways. The only reason I would say to not do that is if Biden was going to rebalance the court by at least throwing 2 more Supreme Court people on there. Now he's come out and said he doesn't want to do it.
I get your outrage, Susan, and setting aside for a moment the issue of Sinema and Manchin, because I don't think they're going to switch parties before the election anyway. I just think that we need to focus a lot of attention on getting these judges through. This is something that can be done. It is not a Senate rule. It is merely a tradition to respect the wishes of a home state senator. And Schumer and Durbin just need to blow it up and say, damn it, you know, we're gonna play by the same rules Mitch McConnell played by, and we're gonna get these people through. Susan, thank you for the call. Malcolm in Blue Bell, Pennsylvania. Hey, Malcolm, what's up?
Yes, Tom, you had a caller earlier. I just have to say you can't underestimate the power of the GOP, and that if Trump throws his name in the hat, I've already seen Mitch McConnell and Bill Barr on television say that they would vote for him again. And so once his name is out there, I think the January 6th coverage, what channels that still are covering it, will completely have a blackout of anything negative that has to do with Trump.
Oh, I agree, but there's no way he's ever going to get elected president.
Right.
So bring it on.
I don't know. I mean, with the Supreme Court right now allowing states to, if they don't like the results of an election,
that's the wild card.
Pick what they want.
Yeah, that absolutely is the wild card.
So many states doing that, the gerrymandering, the list goes on. They already have it set in place to pretty much just pick whoever it is.
Yeah.
And then for the sake of our democracy, I don't think Gavin Newsom, I think he's too tainted by his ex-wife for his name to be in the hat for a 2024 presidential
Really?
run.
You think people are going to hold Kimberly Guilfoyle against him? That was, what, a decade and a half ago?
I think she will. All we need is for her to pop up a week before the election and say that he did X, Y, and Z, and have, like we had in Hillary's case, the government to say that we're going to investigate her. And that damage, it's too great. And in fun fact news, Kimberly Guilfoyle, she went to school with Monica Lewinsky, a young Angelina Jolie, and Lenny Kravitz. They all went to Beverly Hills High School at the same time.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Public record.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm skeptical that she could be that big a liability, but I do see where she could be kind of, a landmine. And
I mean, you have it right now with Alex Jones. His ex-wife just popped up a couple of days ago and said now she wants to testify in front of the January 6th committee. You have it again with the Oath Keeper's ex-wife, who now all of a sudden, I think she was largely the reason he was denied bond, because she exposed photos of a backyard underground bunker.
And I'll give you that, one of the things that was held against Hillary Clinton was, the problems of her husband between Monica Lewinsky and Jeffrey Epstein. I get that.
At this point, we can't afford it with the way that voting rights that we've been, the way that.
Okay, so if you think that Gavin Newsom is tainted, or isn't a good candidate, and I think Kamala Harris actually has a really good, solid chance of becoming president. As Gavin Newsom just said, if Joe Biden announces he's going to run for re-election, I mean, we're 2 years out here. But if he does, I will vote for him. I would vote for him. I would campaign for him, even if he's 80 years old. As long as he's got his wits about him, I'm okay with him. Although I agree with Robert Reich. Robert Reich this morning wrote a really very, very personal op-ed in his Substack newsletter, talking about, Reich was saying that he was 77 and he's noticing what he's starting to lose in terms of faculties and whatnot. And please don't run, Joe. I don't think Joe Biden is going to run for re-election, but I think it's way premature to even be having this conversation, frankly. And I don't want to diminish his stature or his political authority by calling for him not to. But it's always nice to have a lineup of Democrats that you think, oh, this person could be president. So if it's not Gavin Newsom, and given that there's a high probability that it'll be Kamala Harris, but who else fills that in? I would think Elizabeth Warren.
I would love to see Elizabeth Warren or even Bernie, but I just don't know if Bernie's tried.
No, Bernie's not going to do it. He's 80 years old now.
Right, exactly. And lastly, one of the biggest injustices was the Justice Department, or you remember reporting that a federal judge said, are you sure you don't want to charge Mike Flynn with treason? And they declined to do so. That has come back to bite us in the butt. And for that reason, they're dragging their feet too slowly on anything that has to do with prosecuting Trump at this rate. I mean, from the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, the list is just too long at this rate. And I think it's exhausting the public, and they feel like at the end of the day, he's not going to get charged. What can I do? Life goes on. I didn't get to pick the Supreme Court justices. Once again, you have the FBI essentially helping in Brett Kavanaugh's case of not allowing a fair investigation. It's just between that and COVID, people are exhausted.
Yeah, I get it. Malcolm, thank you. Thanks for the call. Interesting speculation here. 46 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know all about. We'll be right back with more of your calls on the other side of this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's your media support group for we the people of the United States and the world. And welcome back. Let's see here. Jessica in Columbia, South Carolina. Hey, Jessica. Thanks for calling. What's on your mind?
It's actually Christina. I'm sorry.
Oh, Christina. You're right. I'm sorry. I've got a Jessica right next to you. Christina in Columbia, South Carolina. You are on the air.
All right, great. Thank you. First-time caller. I enjoy your show, and actually, my husband is a long-time listener and turned me on to your show.
Well, thank you.
I'm excited.
Tell him I said hi.
I will. Thank you. So I'm actually calling in reference to something you said much earlier in the show. You talked about a study about men and women and what they most fear, and you said this was something that you were kind of toying around with, writing an op-ed about, and just the concept of the differences between what men and women fear. And you were also talking about the context of tribalism with that caller.
Yeah, and it really took me by surprise, which I suppose exposes my male privilege. But anyhow, go ahead.
Well, my first thought in pondering it myself, I went to Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh. I went to Christina Rulli and Bill Cosby. I went to the most recent scenario of the UC Berkeley professor Tuesday, and Senator Josh Hawley, and how there is a distinct difference when you set these opposing figures up against each other, where the men, maybe not so much in Senator Hawley's case, but I'll get to that in a second, but Bill Cosby, Brett Kavanaugh are
Harvey
willing
Weinstein.
to stand. Harvey Weinstein are willing to stand up and defend themselves against being humiliated rather than accepting the consequences of their actions, where these women are coming up in response to having had violence acted against them and are trying to hold this person accountable. They're not doing it. The women aren't coming up to try and humiliate the men. They're doing it because they have had violence acted upon them.
Right.
The men are afraid of being humiliated. And what has happened in all of these situations, a tribe of women comes up from Twitter, social media, everything to help be a community of support for these women. You have one accuser, and then by the end of the week, you have 18 accusers. You have one woman who's willing to testify. By the end of the day, you have 6 women willing to testify.
E. Jean Carroll and Donald Trump.
Yes. And so it only takes one act of courage on the woman's part to help inspire courage in her tribe of women who share her story, who share her fears, who share, that sense of being violated.
Yeah.
And,
Christine,
but you don't have. Go ahead.
We just have 20 seconds. What's the point you're trying to make?
So I just wanted to give you that angle of the thought for your study, because on the flip side, you don't have men forming the same type of tribal community to stand up and defend the men.
You're absolutely right. And
if anything, they try to distance themselves.
And forgive me for trying to hurry you along, but there's the music. What's the story with Josh Hawley? Did I miss something?
Well, Josh Hawley is willing to, ask about do women have the capacity for pregnancy and disregarding the rights of transgender people.
Okay. Christine, I got to run. I'm sorry. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. They often say that Republican Senator from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, is the stupidest guy in the entire United States Senate. I get it. Tommy Tuberville gives him a run for his money, but he just came out with what has to be at least the very stupidest idea of the year. Ron Johnson is proposing, there's a shortage of child care workers right now in America. There's a whole bunch of good reasons for that. But he has proposed a solution. His suggestion: any woman in America who's getting any kind of public assistance, you're getting food stamps, you're getting, tuition relief, whatever it may be, you would be forced to go into daycare centers and care for children. Yeah, seriously. This is Ron Johnson's idea. People who had no training, and one of his assistants said, well, it's just like teachers who teach in public schools where their own kids attend. No, it's not. These are not trained professionals. There's no union. This is nuts. There's a whole video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 52 minutes past the hour. Jan in Bend, Oregon. Hey, Jan, what's up?
Hey, how you doing? I'm really interested in the angle, and we talked about mental illness and Donald Trump. And I'm a therapist. My specialization is NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. And I'm tracking kind of this phenomena, which is the amount of time that it takes. So narcissists have this kind of testing and joining phase where they try to bring you to their side and test your loyalty, and the amount of time that it takes for them to flip. Donald Trump has a very short span of time between the testing phase and the joining phase, and flipping. And
what do you mean by flip, Jan? Forgive the interruption, but I don't understand.
But you're no longer a member of the team.
Oh.
So you're one of us, and you're an ally, and we love you. So he uses terms like "we love you," which is,
Right.
a bizarre affection attachment. So the amount of time that it takes between, and I had this happen yesterday, which I thought was really interesting, and I tracked it, where they do the joining. The joining part is we're all members of the same team. I really like you. You really like me. We're very much the same. We have, same personality. By and large, narcissists are charming, which I don't see with Donald Trump. I guess you have to see with different eyes. But then the flip is when they figure out that you're not going to be supporting them, irrationally,
and
then they turn on you.
Right.
And a toxic. And I saw yesterday. It's like, wow, that is a short span of time. It's like how.
What did you see yesterday that says that?
So I do parental alienation and custody cases.
Oh, so you saw this in your own practice, in other words?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But watching Donald Trump, he's one of the shortest time span flippers. The minute you are not on his team, you are, have you ever heard of you? You're my enemy. You're garbage. You're Michael Cohen. So it's just very, very primitive. It's literally like the way a 3-year-old reacts when they don't get, they don't get something they want. It's a temper tantrum.
Right.
And he has a very short, which I think, attributes to the fact he's such a primitive personality, and so toxic and violent that that's what we have to take into account. This is a violent toddler.
Right. So this demonstrates the speed with which he can drop somebody or turn on somebody is an indicator of how severe his narcissistic personality disorder is. Is that what you're suggesting, Jan?
Correct. Exactly.
Okay. I get it.
And some are longer. I think the more mature, some people have different defense mechanisms. Donald Trump has no mature defense mechanisms. He doesn't use humor.
Right.
You never hear Donald Trump actually smiling or laughing unless it's, at someone else's expense.
Right. And he can't make self-depreciating jokes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get
exactly. So
Jan,
the only
thank you.
positive defense.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
No, finish your thought. I'm sorry.
That's okay. The only positive defense mechanisms are humor and planning, and he doesn't use either one of them.
Right.
So he's an angry toddler, who can't take a joke, which is maybe the worst toddler you can imagine.
Right, yeah. I wonder if him and Kim Jong-un bonded because they have the same personality.
Oh, absolutely.
Or maybe Vladimir Putin as well?
Right, and but the other thing is narcissists typically compete with each other. They don't actually like anybody.
Right.
There's nobody on earth. He doesn't like Ivanka. He probably sexually, is attracted to her, and he loves himself, but no other human being on earth. He would turn on anyone.
Yeah. So narcissists identify other narcissists. It's like a secret club, but they all hate each other, but they're competing for the love of everybody else within that club. Or not within that club, outside of that club. Yeah.
Right.
Fascinating,
so
Jan.
Okay.
I had no idea this whole science was that tightly calibrated. I'm really impressed. Jan, thank you. Thank you for teaching me something. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. We're going to continue the conversation. Spencer Schneider is going to tell us about joining a cult and what we might be able to learn from that. And I don't know if he's going to get into Republicans or not, but I'm going to ask. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Black Panthers, Portraits from an Unfinished Revolution, edited by Briah Shih and Yohuro Williams. This is from Chapter 1, In Defense of Self-Defense, Pathways to the Black Panther Party. People joined the Black Panther Party for many different reasons. The moment of politicization was different for everyone, but a few were commonly shared, including the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, and the 1965 Watts Urban Rebellion. A more general sense of frustration and alienation compelled others to join the Panthers' ranks. The party exerted an enormous pull on the imagination of the members, especially those who had experienced police brutality. In the rebellious spirit of the times, the party's bold stance on self-defense resonated with those seeking fresh alternatives for achieving social justice and black liberation. Party members expressed a deep appreciation for other aspects of the Panthers program, including its community service programs, which grew out of a genuine love for the people. My neighborhood friend, a sister that I've known since I was about 11 years old, said, "Claudia, I want you to go with me. We're going to go and hear these Panthers speak at PS 92, which was an elementary school in our community." I said, "Okay, I'll go, I'm down." I listened to these brothers speak and I heard the pitch. I saw the determination and I saw the compassion. I thought, wow, this is the feeling that I used to get when I went into clubs and popped my fingers and got on the dance floor. It was the same feeling, except it was bigger for me now. It was bigger than me. It was full of love of the people. No longer did we have to argue and fight about, what are you looking at me like that for? Or don't step on my sneaker, or this is my block. Now we really had something to fight for. We had a people to fight for. This is bigger than any gang or club. We had a goal. We had something to look forward to, which was the betterment of black people. It was most definitely something that I was searching for, but I didn't yet know what that I was searching. I didn't find it. It fell on me. That was the first meeting. That's what actually started the wheels in my mind for me to become political. I was rank and file. I did a lot of things. The easiest way to say it is just to imagine worker bees. You got one queen, everyone else works. Rank and file. Those were the worker bees. We did it all. The one thing I enjoyed the most was teaching the political education classes on 7th Avenue in front of the Harlem office. That was the most fruitful. But anything I did, it was for the love of the people. Wherever I was sent, or whatever I had to do, it didn't matter anymore because it was for the love of the people. We were trying to get the word out. If I had to sell 125 papers in a day and I got close to that goal, then I did a good job. I was originally from Queens and came out of the Corona branch of the Black Panther Party. When the Panther 21 were arrested and went to jail, in order to keep those offices open and functioning, Panthers were sent all over the city to Harlem. I was one of the Panthers that ended up in the Harlem branch. That's how I got to be there on Wednesday nights to give the PE classes, the political education classes. I was extremely nervous the first time, but once I found my voice, then it went like clockwork. A lot of the people in the community who were just walking by were like, well, let me stop and see what this little girl is talking about, because I was indeed a little girl at that time. We started off every PE class with a 10-point program, and we ended every PE class with, okay, let me hear from you guys. What do you want to see different in your community, and how are you living? Then we would get the feedback, and then we would know how to concentrate our efforts. Rent strikes were crazy, because if you had to live like that, why should you pay rent? We did clothing drives. We did food drives. We did, of course, the breakfast program. There were a lot of other things that happened, and they might have been more meaningful, but those PE classes stayed with me. We were outside on the street in front of the office. When you were giving a class or you were having a talk inside the office and there were only Panthers around you, the feeling was just different than outside on the street. The Panthers knew what you were doing because they were Panthers and they were doing the same thing. Outside, there were constant questions and answers with the people. You had to give yourself up when you were outside in that crowd. You never knew who was going to say, "We don't care about that. We don't care about you. You need to go away." There were a lot of people that just did not know where we were coming from and were afraid that if they were seen in the office or if they were seen asking questions, that they'd get reprisals, that they'd end up getting hurt. They were afraid. Things went so fast. Time seems to accelerate when you're always looking over your shoulder. At this time, it was all-out war against the Panthers, and brothers are being shot down in the street or set up or going to jail for years. We have brothers in jail since that time, 40, 41 years. We've had brothers that we've lost on the inside that we can't let the world forget. The government said, okay, we're going to lock them up and throw away the key and no one will ever care. But it's not true. We want them out. We want freedom for all political prisoners. We don't want any more of them to die on the inside. That's the biggest injustice. There were times when our cadre consisted of almost nothing but women, and that was when the brothers were locked up or had to go underground. I remember being on a front line against a policeman on horseback and being 6 months pregnant. What we wanted was a simple street light, and we got the community out there and we blocked traffic. I didn't know whether I was going to be trampled, my baby killed, but I knew I had to be there. I was an active member of the party from 1968 to 1971, and in those few years, I aged 10, 15 years. We didn't have much time to be little girls. We went straight to womanhood. Talking about these things is bringing up all of these feelings, though I hadn't thought about or touched on them for a long time. It seems that as you get older and you look back on the things that you've done in your life, you say, oh my God, I could have gotten killed then. When you're young, fear is not really in your vocabulary, and once you look back, you wonder, why wasn't I afraid? We didn't have much time to be afraid. It was all about survival. The Black Panthers.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is Spencer Schneider, the author of a new book, Manhattan Cult Story, My Unbelievable True Story of Sex, Crimes, Chaos, and Survival. Spencer-Schneider.com is his website. His Twitter handle is NYCSLS. Spencer, welcome to the program. Tell us about yourself, first off.
Sure. Nice to be here, Tom. I'm an attorney. I live in Manhattan. I grew up in Long Island in a middle-class family, and that's my background.
Yeah, and 23 years ago, I guess it was, or it must have been a little longer than that because you were 23 years inside this cult. You got sucked into a cult that's mostly lawyers, investment bankers, accountants, and doctors?
Exactly, yes.
So tell us about it.
Sure. I guess maybe by way of explaining the group, I can explain how I was lured into it. Mm-hmm. I was a 29-year-old attorney, a corporate attorney working in New York, many long hours, but had pretty much everything I wanted in life. But an acquaintance told me about this group. He called it an esoteric school. Mm-hmm. And invited me to a meeting, and that was the beginning of it.
Yeah, and boom, down the rabbit hole. This cult was run by a woman named Sharon Gans, right? This is
correct.
And she, how I mean, this more or less 30 years ago, I remember the self-help movement and Tony Robbins is kind of continuing it in a relatively non-cult way, but there were some people. I'm trying to remember the guy who started Werner Erhard Est. I mean, there was a lot of this stuff going on about we will make your life better and all you have to know is the secrets of how everything works, and we'll do that and we'll serve as a support group for you. This was that sort of thing, was it not?
Exactly. Sharon Gans actually came from San Francisco and kind of grew out of that whole self-actualization notion. But what she had was a slightly different brand, and it was based upon a philosophy called the Fourth Way, which was Gurdjieff
and Ouspensky. Yeah, P.D. Ouspensky. That was actually one of my favorite books when I was a teenager. And Tertium Organatum.
You're not the first person to tell me how great they enjoyed those, and I like those books too. And sure enough, it was very interesting to study all that, and that was very attractive to us. And it was actually, I like the fact that it was old and not Werner Erhard. It was
this was late 19th century stuff, early 20th.
Exactly. So I figured if it's around that long, it must be okay. And you slowly get lured into this situation where you're under the control of someone, and it happens slowly but firmly.
So America right now, and you eventually made your way out of this cult.
That's right.
And good on you for that. America seems to be, in some ways, or at least many Americans, under the sway of various cults. I mean, the cult of Donald Trump is probably one of the more obvious ones. I would argue that many of these right-wing militia groups are cults as well. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I completely agree. I mean, I escaped in 2012, and when I saw the rise of Donald Trump in 2016, I was alarmed because there was so much about him that reminded me of the leader of our group, who was, I just heard that description that you just read, had every one of those attributes in spades. I mean, through narcissism, through, this grandiose belief in herself. Mm-hmm. They share many of the same characteristics. These right-wing groups that I think a lot of the people there really think they're doing the right thing. I think there are evil people in the groups, sure, and the leaders, but just like in my group, I mean, we were looking for something, mm-hmm. and the leaders knew what we wanted.
Right, and they basically promised it and said, by the way, I alone can fix it, or I alone can do it, as Donald Trump, literally said. How, in your opinion, how can we most effectively help people who are trapped in cults, whether it's a one of these right-wing cults, or whether it's one of the self-help cults, or something else? How do we help people break out of them?
Yeah, that's the big question. And here's, I've been thinking about it a lot. I think the most important thing is to talk to people in the most rational way that you can without provoking them. Because, again, they're under the illusion, as you say, that they're involved with people who are telling them the truth. So it's important to actually explain the truth in a rational way. And I think it's also important to learn that people learn that the leaders are not interested in them except to exploit and use them. And that when it comes to their real self-interest, the leaders are not there for them. And you can see that. I mean, look how many people have been indicted and going to jail in the January 6th movement.
Right. Well, and I've in fact, I wrote an op-ed about this 6 months ago or so, saying that if I truly believed, if Joe Biden had said, the election was stolen from me and offered what I believe to be credible evidence, I might have been there on January 6th. I think many of these people were dupes. They believed that they were trying to help save our country, which is tragic, but still, it's over the top. They should have known, I suppose. There's been a kind of running debate for years that I've been observing in American psychology and cult studies and whatnot. A friend of mine used to work with Ted Patrick and deprogram people back many years ago. The guy who used to kidnap people out of the Hare Krishnas and
right.
And whatnot. Right. And actually, the Maharaji cult was more of a cult, I would say, than the Hare Krishnas were. And it's like, where's the dividing line? You know, I also had a good friend who was in the Hare Krishnas, and he strongly argued to me that it was not a cult because it was entirely voluntary, and they didn't play the mind control games. But he would also say that the Reverend Moon people and the Perfect Master people, I forget, Maharajis people, that was a cult. And you know, I've had people over the years describe, you know, religion as a cult. AA as a cult. I mean, I don't think of religion or AA as cults, but where is the dividing line? When does something cease to be a support group or a shared belief or commonality of interest and become something that is actually toxic and destructive to its members?
Right.
How do you identify
first of all,
that?
Yeah. I think the way to identify it there's several factors, and I talk about it in my book, actually, these hallmarks, I think, of a cult. And the number one is a charismatic leader who is exploiting people and for their own benefit. That's hard to see sometimes. But let's take a look at what your time is and your money. Are you giving a lot of your time? Are you giving a lot of your money? Does the leader mind if you dissent, or are you punished? Is there any toleration for dissent?
Well, you're describing Donald Trump, you know. I mean, you know, he's taken $750 million from his followers just since he got kicked out of the White House.
That's right, and with lies.
Yeah.
So, you know, the rules are strict, and you can be ostracized. I mean, look at all the people who are out of his orbit and what he says about them. You know, some of it, you know, hang Mike Pence.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, and there's also, at least in my group, it was very secretive. And again, you know, exploitation and coercion, that's the dividing line. Because, look, people do say religions are cults, and I don't believe that unless they are sort of splinters, like, you know, the Mormons have these far out groups.
Yeah, the fringe, the ones on the fringes of those more or less mainstream religions. Fascinating stuff. Spencer Schneider, the book is Manhattan Cult Story, my unbelievable true story of sex, crimes, chaos, and survival. Great work, Spencer. Thanks a lot for dropping by.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Good talking with you, and good learning about this. It's a fascinating topic. We'll continue all of our various conversations for the last 2.5 hours. On the other side of this break, I'll pick up your calls at 16 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Ever been in a cult? How'd you get out of it? Can politics be cult-like? Certainly seems that way to me. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Jessica in Chicago. Hey, Jessica, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Once again, I love your show, and I'm going to call Durbin and Schumer today.
Good.
When I was driving home, there was a caller talking about Flynn. Mike Flynn, Memorial Day in Texas. I want to know why Miramar can't happen here. There's an online article in the New Yorker. And in December, Flynn said Trump could invoke martial law. So with the Myanmar coup, that was overthrowing a civilian government that, just like Trump, had unsubstantial claims of electoral fraud.
Oh, yeah, the Myanmar Aung San Suu Kyi, overthrowing her administration, wasn't it? If I'm remembering correct, in former Burma and Myanmar. Yeah.
And Flynn worked
and
over
Flynn said, America can do the same thing, essentially. I had forgotten about that.
And he had a consulting firm working over there in Turkey. The thing is, she can go online and find out tons of stuff about Flynn. Flynn spoke about QAnon conspiracy theories. He said American patriots may have to resort to violence. And one phrase that General Flynn always used, he said, a storm is coming.
Right. These are all QAnon phrases.
Yes. And then Trump repeated it in the Oval Office one day, and the reporter said, "What do you mean by that?" And Trump said, "You'll see. You'll find out.
Right.
So he's a big part of all this, and the fact that he has to plead the fifth for everything just proves it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jessica.
And Joyce was asking, well, I was telling her about in the days leading up to that, Facebook had an ad on the Come Be a Part of History, and it had a gray background with white fireworks, and it was for January 6th, Come Be a Part of History, and it had loud music and fireworks. So I saved it, but yes, I tried to save it. I didn't realize. So it was on a link, and so the next morning I was like going to send it to Jamie Raspin. I did tell him about it, though. But I pulled up the link to show my husband, and Facebook deleted it. And I'm like, oh, my goodness, you can't get Facebook to delete anything, and yet they didn't want to go down because they knew what they did. Yeah. I believe that's why he changed his little sign to mean infinity instead of Facebook.
Meta, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, I think he thought he was going to go down for some of this, and he is responsible.
That's interesting. Yeah, he had 2 or 3 private dinners with Donald Trump in the White House.
And also putting all these ads out there when people are in lockup and having nothing to do.
Right.
And I do remember watching the news feed. There was so much news feed on January 6th. I was stunned. And I remember seeing a young black Trumpster dressed. He was in Trump clothing, and he said, I want to be a part of history. And I was like, oh, my God.
Yeah, vulnerable people sucked in. It's the cult. It's the cult. Jessica, I got to run, but thank you for the call, and spot on. Absolutely. 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Hey, Gymnasium Jordan just got called out by Ted Lieu in a House committee meeting, pointing out that Jordan had called the reporter who had done the story on this 10-year-old girl who got raped and impregnated a lie, and then quietly tried to delete his tweet. Karma. Anna, let's pick up your phone calls here. Anna in Tustin, California. Hey, Anna, what's on your mind today?
Oh, good morning, Tom. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, I'm calling to contribute to the conversation about the white supremacists wearing of polo shirts and their look. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to just add to, I'm not contradicting the calls that came ahead of me that talked about tribal identity and their group.
And they're dressing in Donald Trump golf clothes, basically.
Right. Well, that I think is more the fact that polo shirts are ubiquitous. I think that it's just the uniform of tennis wearing and golfing. That's sort of accidental. I don't think that it's actual emulation of Donald Trump so much. What I wanted to talk about was what's more important is that it's actually directed at us. It's not just a matter of their brand identity, of their group identity within their circle. What it is, I think it's a conscious marketing attempt.
Anna, your phone just went nuts.
Hello?
Yeah, your phone just went nuts. I'm going to put you on hold. Joyce, Anna's on line 6. If you can figure out what's going on, that was rough. And we'll get you back on. Bernice, meanwhile, Bernice in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Bernice, what's on your mind?
Hi. I called about the Senate, blue slip filibuster issue, but since you mentioned Jim Jordan, I saw that interview and by one of the reporters, and the reason he says he took down his tweet is because he found out that it was, and I hate this phrase, an illegal alien.
Right, I know. This is the new talking point. At first it was, it's all a lie, and then it was, no, it's an illegal alien. So I guess they got a twofer, right?
Exactly. They always are able to do that. But anyway, about the Senate Blue Slip filibuster, I really think that the reason, if there is disenchantment among Democrats, and I think there is to a large degree, I think it's because of Senate gridlock for the most part, because they have blocked everything, and especially, the Republicans and those two Democrats. So I think that just really threatens our democracy, I think. But I think to counter that, our midterm strategy has to be built around how much success the House has had. Because if we would just build up, how much they have passed, how much good legislation is passed in the House, and that gets done there, but then it goes to die in the Senate, of course. And just to make the point that because they have a decent majority, they are able to do these things, and that's what we need in the Senate, and we need it in state legislatures, and we need them in governorships, and play up. This is what Democrats can do, and I think that would encourage Democrats to be more progressive, because so many of them are so afraid of, being called liberal, that horrible label.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think it's also time to stop being afraid of democracy. The filibuster is standing in the way of democracy.
Yes.
And go ahead.
Yes. The other, I just wanted, before I hung up, that I always remember that essay that you bring up every now and then. Is it Joe, something about American Joe?
Oh, yeah, Joe Republican.
Joe Republican. Oh, my God, that is perfect. I think everybody needs to be reminded of that every now and then.
Yeah, there you go. If you're listening and don't know what we're talking about, you can plug it into a search engine. Bernice, thank you. Thank you. Spot on. Gloria in Shannon, North Carolina. Gloria, hang on just a second. Apparently, we've got Anna's phone working again. So let me get back to Anna. Anna, you want to finish your thought?
Oh, yes. Hi, Tom. Thank you very much. Okay. What I wanted to say that I think that the clothing it's outwardly directed. It's sort of Klan robes for the 21st century, updated, except for it's not meant to conceal. It's meant to reveal and also to be attractive. I think that remember the mass shooting in Norway?
Yeah, Anders Breivik.
The white supremacist. Exactly. He wrote a manifesto before the shooting, and in his long manifesto, he also touched on fashion. Wow, Renaissance guy, right?
Oh, really?
So anyway, he talked about how the white nationalist movement, they have to look spiffy. They have to look nice. They have to be attractive. And a lot of that, he's a hero to the white supremacist movement in America. Richard Spencer, we know him. I think he's the one that coined the term alt-right. So again, it's sort of whitewashing, no pun intended, trying to make ugly ideas palatable. Right. And hello?
Yeah, I'm listening. Yeah.
Okay, so part of the fashion, and he also wrote quite a lot about fashion, and he's trying to set an example. Whenever he shows up on television or in interviews, he's wearing a three-piece suit, his haircut is nice, and before Charlottesville, there's Vanguard America was that particular nationalist group that wrote a bunch of memos for the Daily Stormer, and I find fashion interesting, so I did a deep dive on this, and the blogger who wrote for Daily Stormer wrote, before the Charlottesville march, he wrote a memo to people participating on how they should appear. And, quote, he wrote, the exact words, "The core of marketing is aesthetic. We need to look appealing," he wrote. "We have to be hip and we have to be sexy."
Okay, I get it. Anna, I got to run, but thank you. Thank you very much for that.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And we'll be right back with more of your calls. Gloria, I'll pick you up on the other side of the break. We'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stokely, A Life by Peniel E. Joseph. This is from the preface. Stokely Carmichael is a troubling icon of America's civil rights years. His Black Power call became a national Rorschach test. Whereas many blacks viewed it as righteous, many whites saw violent foreboding. Newspapers brooded over Carmichael's words, quickly forming a consensus that judged the slogan to be at best intemperate and at worst a blatant call for anti-white violence and reverse racism. In 1966, Black power reverberated around the world, galvanizing blacks, outraging whites, and inspiring a cross-section of ethnic and racial minorities. In 1969, Carmichael left the United States for Conakry, Guinea, where he reinvented himself as a roving Pan-Africanist organizer and professional revolutionary. For the next 30 years, he remained an energetic dissident, a throwback to the heady years of the 1960s. Carmichael turned the quest for black political power into his life's work. His faith in a style of politics many considered anachronistic came out of the same tenacity and stubbornness that once made him one of the most effective and controversial activists of his generation. These same qualities, however, limited Carmichael's efforts as a Pan-Africanist political mobilizer. Before leaving America, Stokely resigned as Black Power's glamorous enfant terrible. Telegenic, brash, equal parts angry and gregarious, whether dressed in three-piece suits, leather jackets, sharecroppers' overhauls, or African dashikis, Carmichael became to represent the era's multifaceted identity, a hipster hero whose easy grace allowed him to consort effortlessly with both the dignified and the damned. The name Stokely Carmichael first came into my consciousness when I was a young boy coming of age in New York City. As the proud son of a Haitian mother who belonged to local 1199 Hospital Workers Union, part of SEIU, I grew up hearing stories of how civil rights activists, Black Power revolutionaries, Pan-Africanist freedom fighters, and trade unionists helped to shape a new world in America and beyond. By the time I was in elementary school, I was on my first picket line, accompanying my mother in support of an 1199 strike. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King supported 1199 during the 1960s. Stokely Carmichael's political importance came into sharper focus when I was in junior high after the premiere of the landmark PBS documentary series Eyes on the Prize, which featured the 24-year-old Carmichael's fiery Black Power speech and rightly characterized Stokely as his generation's heir to Malcolm X. Over the course of a decade of research on Carmichael, I would come to understand him as that and much more. Carmichael's youth, casual dress, and charisma made him an easily identifiable hero, one whose quick smile and passionate speeches left an indelible impression. An adopted son of the South by way of Trinidad, the Bronx, and Harlem, Stokely adapted while transforming whatever environment he encountered. As a native New Yorker growing up in the city's tense racial climate of the 1980s, I found Carmichael's survival instincts appealing. As a young graduate student in Philadelphia, I had the opportunity to hear him speak and briefly met him afterward. He encouraged me to stay committed to the Black freedom movement, a struggle he defined as infinite. With his flowing African robes, gray hair, and white beard, he looked like a prince. And he had changed his name. He was no longer Stokely Carmichael. As Malcolm Little had become Malcolm X and later El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Stokely had become Kwame Ture. It was a name that paid homage to his two African heroes, men who had been the first presidents of their countries, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Guinea's Sekou Touré. Kwame Ture spelled the Guinean's name not as the French did, as white Europeans did, but as Arabs and Muslims did. Sekou Touré, S-E-K-U-T-U-R-E. As a college student, Carmichael helped transform America by organizing sit-ins, demonstrations, and voter registrations during the Civil Rights Movement's heroic years, a period that roughly encompasses the decade between the 1954 Brown v. Board Supreme Court decision, desegregation decision, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and has become enshrined in public memory through national holidays, films, commemorations, and monuments. Carmichael's deep sense of justice contributed to his evolution into Kwame Ture, the Pan-Africanist revolutionary and anti-capitalist organizer who moved to West Africa and remained tenacious in the face of searing political setbacks. Carmichael ultimately judged America incapable of creating the free and just world he had struggled for as a young man. But despite living in Africa for the final 30 years of his life, Carmichael's legendary stature as a black power activist lingered even if many ignored his lasting contributions to civil rights struggles that included a bruising quest for the vote in the Deep South. Although today largely forgotten, Stokely Carmichael remains one of the protean figures of the 20th century, a revolutionary who passionately believed in self-defense and armed rebellion, even as he revered nonviolence. The book Stokely, A Life, by Peniel L. Joseph. By Robin and Harley. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. There's an amazing study out of Qatar, the country in the Middle East, back from 2020. Now, this was back before there was a vaccine for COVID. And they looked at over 30,000 healthcare workers in Qatar and wanted to figure out, what might reduce the risk of getting COVID. Again, this was before there was any vaccine. And what they found was that people who had had a flu vaccine were less likely to get COVID than people who hadn't had the flu vaccine. This is absolutely remarkable, and nearly 90% less likely to develop severe COVID. It was 30% less likely to test positive and 89% less likely to develop severe COVID compared with their coworkers who had not. It's an amazing study. The whole details are on a video over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Picking up your calls. Gloria in Shannon, North Carolina. Let's try it again, Gloria. What's up?
Yeah, Tom, I just wanted to comment on the gentleman that called earlier, Malcolm.
From Pennsylvania, yeah.
Yeah, that spoke about Gavin Newsom and Kimberly Guilfoyle. Kimberly Guilfoyle is not going to make a difference with Gavin Newsom. He's got his own, he's got a second wife, and she's well beloved in California, California First Lady. And Guilfoyle is not going to make a dent in Gavin Newsom.
That was my sense of it. I don't think that unless there's some kind of blockbuster. I mean, it would have to be huge. But on the other hand, Guilfoyle is now part of the Trump cult, and Don Jr. is probably the one of the sickest and most toxic parts of that, and she's following him around. So.
Exactly, and that's not good for her. So she needs to be quiet if she thinks she's gonna cause a problem. But Tom, there was one other thing I wanted to bring. We could probably get into it maybe tomorrow. But I wanted to make a statement about they're discussing our economy and the job. They're always harping on the job shortages and I mean the worker shortages and things like that. But I've noticed in around where I live and far and wide, our biggest problem is the shift in the people. The people are shifted from. You've got a lot of people that have, for instance, gone back to college and got degrees and going in different directions and things like that. But you know who used to cover a lot of those openings that now are not here to do it? The Hispanic community.
Yeah.
Now they have disappeared, especially around where I live. I live not far from a poultry plant, and they are crying for help. And before, like say the Hispanic community was, they were a bunch of them around here. In the community I live in, I'm surrounded by them. Was surrounded by them, but they've disappeared.
Yeah, there's 2 million fewer immigrants in the United States right now than there were 2 years ago. Part of that has to do apparently with COVID, and a lot of it has to do with, speculatively, but it has to do with Trump having cracked down on the southern border.
That's exactly it. Because at one time we had a problem with U.S. Marshals and ICE rampaging through our community at one time, and that's because of the poultry plants. There's several poultry plants in the area, and they was rampaging through, coming through with buses.
Well, hopefully they're paying good enough wages now that Americans are willing to come up, show up and work.
Yes, they are. Even my son finally got a position there with security team.
Cool.
And they started him off with $16 an hour.
Oh, that's a good start. I mean, everything was $7, $8 an hour back, just 5 years ago. Yeah.
They kept trying, the guy that was head of the security team there, they kept trying to get him because he was working at a Dollar General part-time, and he kept trying to get him to come over. And finally, when he told him they got him up to $16 an hour, he went over, and the guy hired him before he left office.
Yeah. This is the point that I've made for years about the so-called illegal immigration problem, is that, we want a certain reasonable level of immigration in the United States. Historically, around 1 million people a year coming into this country seems to be, enough to fill the need for, labor and whatnot. And the labor market has tightened up, I think, in part because of that, in part because COVID knocked a lot of people out of the labor force too. But also, it's an illegal employer problem. Employers have been they've been basically exploiting people in this country, without documentation, and paying them crap wages. And now that there's a shortage of such folks, wages are going up. That seems to me like actually a good thing. I realize it's contributing to inflation, but I think it's a good thing. Gloria, thank you. Thanks for calling, and thanks for sharing all that with us. I appreciate it. Adam in Youngstown, Ohio. Hey, Adam, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to give you an update of what was going on a week and a day ago, Wednesday of last week. It made all the local news on TV. There was an off gas station, off name. It's not like a BP or a Marathon or something like that. It just went up a few years ago, and it's right at the Ohio-PA line. And they ran a promotion for one day, and they even showed an aerial view of cars just stopped for like 2 miles. And the promotion was gas station prices for one day only, the day that Biden was inaugurated. So it was like $238 or $238.9 or something all day.
Right.
And guess who was responsible for putting it on?
I don't know.
Americans for Prosperity.
Oh, yeah, which is funded with, oil money from the Coke. Exactly, the Coke refineries.
I had to explain it to my daughter. The grifters are blaming Biden through insinuation.
Right.
And then inviting everybody into this gas station.
Here's the amazing statistic that I saw a couple of days ago, and I haven't been able to confirm it yet, but it comports with my experience driving. I have a plug-in hybrid, so I've used maybe 3 tanks of gasoline in the last 5 years since I bought this car, and all the rest of the time I'm driving on electricity. And it was that a 200-mile fill-up, basically, in an electric car, to fill up a battery so an electric car will go 200 miles, costs $6. Now, you can't go 200 miles in a gasoline-powered car for $6. Now, that sounds kind of low to me. It might be a little more than that. It might be $10. I don't know, but I have not even noticed, since I've been plugging my car in, I have not noticed any change in my electric bill at all. So,
well, this dude from Americans for Prosperity, the regional chapter, got his little interview on television.
Oh, of course.
And they got to hork it up. These grifters who have been bilking people out of gas money are blaming Biden through insinuation. They got stones, man.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Adam, thanks for the call. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. Tony in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'd like to talk about Ron DeSantis again.
Okay.
You're right. Flint is very likely to be the next president, unfortunately.
Because, well, I just got an email from him this morning. I mean, if he's emailing to people in Oregon, he's running a national campaign.
what he's done, and I want everybody who's connected with an academic institution to listen to this. I used to be in charge of accreditation in California for an institution in California. Ron DeSantis has gotten the University of Central Florida in Orlando, a very large school public. They have taken down all references against racism from their website. Now, this is not kindergarten, it's not high school, it's collegiate level.
So they had to remove a statement that they were opposed to racism from their website?
Yes, yes.
Whoa.
The philosophy department, it's in the Washington Post.
Wow. Okay, I'll check that out. Tony, thank you for that. That's startling. Not surprising, I suppose, but startling. Scott in Seattle. Hey, Scott, what's up?
Third call, Mr. Hartmann. Thank you for taking it.
Sure.
I called last week with my personal viewpoint as an ordinary Catholic layperson, upset about anti-abortion legislation since the overturning of Roe versus Wade. I stand by what I said then. Nobody likes abortion, but just like any other health care issue, this is best left to the woman involved, her medical providers, maybe immediate relations, and possibly her faith supporters. She should be able to make the best decision under her circumstances here and now in an imperfect world. I shouldn't leave the impression that I think all pro-lifers only want to call the wrath of the law down upon desperate poor young women. Some of the pro-lifers really are involved in helping those women get all the material, medical, and financial support they need. We should encourage that. The trouble is that kind of support is really rare.
Yeah,
it seems most.
I get it, Scott. Rather than reading a statement, why don't you just tell me what you want to say here? Because we're going to hit a break in a second.
Okay, just that if they were that concerned about sanctity of life, they should be more active about helping the women.
Yeah,
and as you would say on some news items, this is just no.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Scott. Yeah, that's a phrase I use too much, I think. Scott, thank you. 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news. Well, I think we've covered the news of the day. I'll pick up more of your calls on the other side of this break. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the true people's media, talk media for the rest of us. Right back with your calls in just a second. And welcome back, Cheryl in Sekiu, Washington. Am I saying that right?
CQ.
CQ, okay.
CQ, yeah, okay. It's an old Indian name.
Yeah, so what's up?
Okay, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the radical evangelical Christian cults. I know you don't think religions are cults, but I believe
I think some are.
Okay, well, I believe they are. I have been following a lady named Tia Lebbings, and she escaped with her 5 children and her very life from a fundamentalist marriage that she got into as a 19 or something, and she was in a marriage that was like we see with the Duggars and these other type of people. Okay, and she is exposing everything. And my point being, when we talk about these poor young women who are forced into these marriages so young, have a baby sometimes every year, and they don't know what to do when they get married like this, because they're expected to be perfect to all of the outside world, and they have usually an abusive husband following their idea of what Scripture is, and they're partnered with older women in the church who come in to teach these poor young girls how to present this perfect life. And in my opinion, those women that are older and are doing this to these women, they're almost worse than the men who
they're like the Ghislaine Maxwells.
Yes. And you know, they know what these poor women are going through. They're being abused. They're being made to be pregnant every year. They have women, according to Tia, this author and speaker, you should have her on your show sometime. She says that statistically these women die younger because they're having all of these pregnancies.
Their bodies burn out.
They burn out, and also they die from a higher rate of cancer from the not only the physical stress, but the emotional stress going along with this abuse. And she talks about that they consider themselves to be in a federal marriage, and that allows the husband, it's the husband's duty to discipline their wives and children.
Wow.
And she's fascinating, and I've learned so much from her. I knew a little bit, but
is there are these like little offshoot churches that are whose names you wouldn't recognize?
She
or is
started
this
out, believe it or not, even some branches of the Presbyterian Church have gone off into this type of cult-like behavior.
Wow.
She started out with real fundamentalists, like we think of when we hear fundamentalists, and then she and her husband went. Her husband had a lot of faults, a lot of arguments with the leaders, the male leaders, because it's all about power with the men.
Sure.
And they fight a lot among themselves, the males do. So her husband moved them from church to church to church in her life, got to a worse church, one that was even worse than the
It's like a
initial
wildlife
church.
Documentary.
Oh, it's horrifying,
The alpha
what
males
that
fighting
woman
with
went
each other.
through.
Yeah, I'll Cheryl, is there a book or a website?
These men, so.
I beg your pardon?
The older women in these churches are enabling these male leaders
Is there
to be abusive.
is there a book or website where I can learn more about this?
Well, her name is Tia, T-I-A,
Right.
Leving, L-E-V-I-N-G-S.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Remember Paul Manafort? He used to be business partners with Roger Stone back in the day, working for Republican politicians like, Nixon and Reagan. Well, in 2004, he took a really sweet gig over in Ukraine, helping the Russians, President Putin, install Viktor Yanukovych as the president of Ukraine, a nice Putin puppet. That same year, though, the people of Ukraine said enough, and basically Yanukovych got driven out of the country. So they tried it again in 2010. Let's bring, this Putin puppet back into Ukraine, Yanukovych. And it worked until 2014 when they got kicked out. So he gets kicked out of Ukraine, Manafort. So what does he do the next year, 2015? He decides to run the Trump campaign. Are you starting to see a pattern here? Yeah, could be. Okay, there's an entire video that outlines this whole timeline over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls, Lynn in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Lynn, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Listen, I called you last year about Mike Flynn speaking at Kenneth Copeland Church. Big speech about being a warrior for Christ to the whole thing.
They're in Oklahoma?
No, Kenneth Copeland Ministries. He's in Texas.
Ah, okay.
I think you know what I was talking about last year.
I do.
But there's a posted on Twitter. There's somebody in the audience or whatever, which of course is worldwide and nationwide, about the Christo-fascist indoctrination prayer. And it's all across the big screen at the church, and this whole congregation is repeating it. I feel like it's shocking and it's downright scary. And I feel like it needs more attention because I feel like it's like the part of the Mike Flynn PSYOP operation,
Mm-hmm.
This guy that posted his name, Nick, I don't know if the case saw it, Nick Knudsen.
Mm-hmm.
I tweeted it to you, but I don't know if you got it because I'm not too good at Twitter.
Yeah.
But, if you could go over there and just watch, it's like a 4-minute video, and it's just like, oh, my God.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw Mike Flynn do basically a QAnon initiation, and another one I saw where he was leading some kind of prayer. Maybe we're talking about the same thing, Lynn.
Well, he wasn't there. I don't think he was there. You couldn't tell there was like 4 guys on stage.
Yeah.
But it's got the whole thing on the screen like, we will do this, and we are the rulers of the government, and and we will take over.
It's a cult.
It's
a cult. There is no way around it. Lynn, thank you.
I feel like it just needs more attention.
Yeah, thank you very much for raising it. I appreciate it. Rockford in Burlington, Washington. Hey, Rockford, what's up?
I would draw attention to the reconciliation bill that Schumer and Manchin are negotiating.
Yeah, the Build Back Better version 2, or Build Back Better Light.
I actually hope that they'll change it to an income reduction. I think that
Rockford, I'm sorry, your phone is breaking up so badly. I'm losing every other word. I'm going to put you on hold, and you can talk to Joyce on line 2 there. Stevie in Greensboro, North Carolina. Hey, Stevie, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I have a hypothetical. What if President Biden signed an executive order within a 100-mile radius of a federal building, all high-capacity rifles were banned? How would that look?
He could do it for federal buildings. The 100-mile radius is state territory, and he couldn't do that. Which raises, by the way, another interesting suggestion that I've seen with regard to the abortion issue, which I realize is not apropos of your gun thing, but and that is that there are VA facilities all over the country that are already medical facilities that have the ability to perform abortions, most of them. And this would be a way that Joe Biden could make abortion available in states where it's not legal. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, but banning guns. I mean, guns are already banned on most federal land, and although I think Obama allowed them on national parks.
Could he expand that radius though? Because schools would be in that radius, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And then he would have to come up with some type of a permit.
No, he couldn't. The problem, Stevie, is he couldn't expand the radius because you're infringing on state territory. Okay. Good idea, but keep thinking. I like the way you're thinking. Rockford, you want to try it again?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Your phone is no longer breaking up.
As far as the reconciliation bill goes, I was hoping to turn it like an Inflation Reduction Act and label it as such. And,
that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, so you'd be putting, Republicans, they have to vote against it. They're trying to make that a, campaign situation. You could add the windfall profits tax to it.
Yeah.
And you could lower prescription drug costs.
I think your labeling idea, I mean, we saw this with George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, Clean Water Act makes the water dirtier, the Clean Air Act makes the air dirtier, the Healthy Forests Act lets them clear cut forests. I like it. Rockford, thank you. Johan in Los Angeles. Johan, we got about 30 seconds. You got a quick one here?
About the code that you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Is this related to when British sent the prisoners, the criminals back in the day between 1600 and 1870, sent to America and Australia? They never served their time, and is that why there is this type of cult?
I don't know, and I don't think there's any association. I think that this was just your garden variety self-help cult in New York. Johan, thank you for the call. Thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It does require every single one of us, and that's you. And keep in mind, if you live in a state with a Republican Secretary of State, they are probably trying to figure out how to get your name off the voting rolls. Make sure you're registered to vote. Double check your registration. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's